It all begins in a quiet sophomore classroom, where students enjoy their downtime. Meanwhile, someone is intensely focused on solving super complex mathematical formulas. Right next to him, a chubby boy is utterly bored. He decides to stretch out the window and dramatically comments on how different the wind is today. The bespectacled boy, named Chu Shun, who was focused on his studies, hears this and asks if the wind is really that noisy. But his friend, Fang Yuan, starts pretending to catch a breeze and says that the correct answer is probably C. Chu Shun quickly corrects him, saying that the correct answer to the question about wind speed is letter D, but Fang Yuan complains that he's ruining the mood and asks about a pink envelope she saw on his desk. Without any mystery, Chu Sunja says that it was a love letter. Fang Yuan thinks his friend is just trying to brag and tells him not to lie to himself, but Chu Shun calmly repeats that it was indeed a statement. Desperate upon receiving the confirmation, Fang Yuan begins to sweat profusely and begs his friend to retract what he said, inventing a story about an acquaintance who is devastated by the news. He keeps insisting that he's only worried about this supposed friend and decides to pretend to be feeling unwell so he can go to sleep. Then, Chu Shun throws a bucket of cold water on the situation by revealing that the letter was written by Zhang Xuan, the girl from the next classroom who Fang Yuan is in love with. The boy nearly explodes with rage at the revelation and starts yelling that his friend deserves to die, wanting to know if he accepted the declaration. Chu Shun simply holds his friend's face to restrain him and replies no. With the utmost coldness, he confesses that he decided to deliver the letter directly to the professor. Fang Yuan falls into complete despair and starts yelling in the classroom that his life is over, drawing the attention of all his other classmates who begin to gossip. Our boy thinks to himself that he doesn't have time to waste on this kind of nonsense, because he learned early on that society is far from fair. He reflects that while some are born rich, others have to work like beasts of burden, with education being the only real path to improve their lives. For him, focusing on books is the only shortcut to changing social class, and dating in high school would just be a waste of time and money. But what I want to know is if I'm the only one who noticed this girl's great attributes. The young man even calculates that spending 2 hours a day dating would result in more than 130,000 minutes wasted over 3 years. He wonders how much more knowledge he could acquire if he dedicated all that time to securing a place at his dream university. With this in mind, he focuses on the determination to study to the absolute limit so as not to waste any opportunity. For the young man, the idea of dating is so pointless that not even a dog would waste its time on it, and strongly reaffirms that relationships would only hinder his academic performance. Meat only really ends up on vegans' plates, Fang Yuan says, revolted by his colleague's coldness. I'm furious, he says, throwing a plastic bottle at him and yelling that someone so insensitive deserves to stay single forever. But suddenly, a magical and super colorful energy emerges from nowhere and envelops Chu Shun in the middle of the classroom. Before his eyes, a floating screen appears, carrying a system that links directly to the young man's mind. The mysterious voice welcomes you to the perfect life system, promising to help you achieve absolute success. The system explains that whenever someone nearby has a friendly level of affection towards him, Chu Shun can obtain a skill from that person. Furthermore, skills are divided into different rarity levels, ranging from common to the most legendary. Is the guy so lucky that he even gets a system like that? But he soon realizes that no one around him is reacting, concluding that the screen of light can only be seen by him. Curious, Chu Shun decides to analyze the terms of affection and the available skill options for rescue. The system shows that very few people have a high level of affection for him, which makes the young man think that the top of the world is truly a lonely place for geniuses. He decides to start by testing the system with his childhood friend Fang Yuan, even knowing that the boy is a complete pervert. The drawing process begins immediately, and the system starts extracting a characteristic from Fang Yuan. To his surprise, he ends up gaining the short skirt enthusiast trait, which makes him lose any resistance to that type of clothing and want to wear it. Upon imagining his chubby friend dressed in a schoolgirl skirt, Chu Shun nearly spits blood after seeing this vision straight from hell and refuses the special mission released by the system. At that moment, the bell rings announcing the end of recess, and the teacher enters the room to hand out the results of the mock exam. The teacher is Wang Lihong, a demanding woman who has great affection for Chu Shun precisely because his high grades guarantee her prestige at the school. Determined to get something truly useful for his studies, the young man decides to use his next chance at the raffle on the teacher. The system initiates another colored draw to extract one of Wang Lihong's abilities. However, he ends up gaining the passionate brain trait, which makes him extremely angry when he realizes that this system doesn't help him study at all. While he recovers from the shock, the teacher begins calling out the students by their highest grades, starting with Su Muqing. She proudly announces that the girl came in first place in the entire school with an impressive score. The whole room starts whispering in amazement, commenting that they've lost count of how many times the girl has reached the top. Su Muqing calmly stands aloof under the admiring gazes of everyone, being pointed out as the perfect example to follow. Whoever comments the most on the videos will win this waifu. Next, the teacher calls Chu Shun, who once again ended up in second place overall in the school. The young man is consumed by frustration and deeply regrets not being able to surpass his rival at all. He is so obsessed with beating her that he has taken to obsessively writing Su Muqing's name on his scratch paper. Chu Shun knows that with such a high score, at any other school he would be considered a true academic god and the greatest pride of his parents. However, all that bright future turned out to be just an illusion because of a single person, Su Muqing. She came into his life like an overwhelming force that completely crushed his plans. Now Chu Shun feels condemned to eternal second place, blaming his rival for making him experience the bitter taste of feeling like a failure. The situation is so extreme that the girl has become the reason he wakes up crying in the middle of the night because of terrible nightmares. Just like that girl who rejected you, everyone knows. Su Muqing became a true obsession and his worst nightmare, to the point that the mere sound of her name caused him immense stress. The young man doesn't understand how her level of affection for him is so high since they've barely spoken lately and the system must be malfunctioning. But after thinking about it some more, he decides to give it a chance and see what the system can get out of it. Thus, Chu Shun begins the skill draw, focusing on her great academic rival. He ends up gaining a trait that increases his study efficiency by 10%, happily realizing that the tool isn't so useless after all. Thinking that he can now study intensely in any noisy place, he lets out a confident smile, finally having a chance to defeat her. In a moment of excitement, he slams his hand on the table and thinks aloud that ordinary people don't matter and that he only needs Su Muqing in that room. Chu Shun becomes filled with determination and decides that he will undertake any unique mission necessary to further improve this new skill. At that moment, he casts such an intense and focused gaze towards Su Muqing that the girl is startled by the sudden stare. However, due to a strange mental interference, she ends up realizing that he would be willing to do absolutely anything for her. Completely red-faced and with her heart racing, Su Muqing is baffled as to why the boy is suddenly thinking such intense thoughts about her. At this point, the focus returns to the teacher, who continues calling the students to the front of the class to hand out their mock exam scores. She angrily shouts Fang Yuan's name, demanding that he come over and receive a good scolding for only passing one subject. The chubby boy panics completely, unable to believe the disastrous outcome. Fang Yuan is desperate, wondering how he will explain this failure at home, and begs the school not to message his parents. He starts rehearsing flimsy excuses in his mind, planning to say that he did poorly on the test because he had the flu and was dizzy. Su Muqing simply observes and notices that he's trying to use the same trick as always. That's when we discover one of the girl's biggest secrets, one that absolutely no one else in the world suspects. It turns out that, since she was very young, Su Muqing has had the special ability to read the thoughts of everyone around her. While the teacher calls on another student, the young woman listens to her classmates' thoughts, lamenting that she cheated and still got a bad grade. We already have the waifu of the second person who comments the most. Next, she hears the malicious thoughts of another girl, who confesses to having given the wrong answers on purpose just to harm her friend. Su Muqing writes in her notebook and recalls that, during her childhood, this power of telepathy was a true curse in her life. His mind was constantly filled with loud voices, selfish thoughts, and dangerous secrets that were too exhausting for a child to bear. It was only when she grew up that she finally learned to control the ability, simply by not focusing her attention on anyone to keep her mind quiet. Still, sometimes it's difficult to control the power, which leads her to end up knowing practically all the dark secrets of that classroom. She knows, for example, that those two girls who hang out together and pretend to be inseparable best friends, they actually hate each other deeply, and their friendship is on the verge of falling apart completely. She also knows couples who love each other in secret, but who will probably never confess their feelings unless someone gives them a little push. And then there's that kid in class who calls himself a literary genius. But in reality, he just spends his time reading comic books with rather dubious and perverse content during class. Despite knowing all this, Su Muqing prefers to keep it a secret and only wishes to have a peaceful youth, even if it means living without friends. She believes that keeping a low profile is the best choice for her life, but there is one big exception among all those people. Chushun is the only boy in the entire school who doesn't evoke any feelings of aversion or disgust in her. Even though he treats her like an academic rival all the time, his mind is the most focused, clear, and determined she has ever heard. While some think the boy is just arrogant, she knows very well that he is sincere and that his only real desire is to focus on his studies. What she could never have imagined was that the thoughts of that boy, so focused and proper, would suddenly change course. Out of nowhere, Su Muqing hears a mental voice of his telling her directly that he only needs her in that class. The young woman's mind goes into complete turmoil and begins to race at such an unexpected declaration. Then, she hears him mentally reinforcing that he would do absolutely anything for her. Su Muqing is completely shocked and turns as red as a pepper, unable to believe what she has just heard. At that moment, Fang Yuan nudges his friend and asks why he's staring at the girl with that love-struck look, leaving Chu Shun confused by the comment. Suddenly, the teacher calls Su Muqing's attention and asks her to collect the tests from the students who were absent today and put them away. The girl quickly tries to hide her nervousness and walks to the teacher's desk to get the papers. But as she approaches, Chu Shun's thoughts begin to wander to the touches of fingers and hands intertwining. Su Muqing almost fell backward when she heard him plotting an excuse just to be able to hold her hand, while the boy continued with his secret plan. Chu Shun continues philosophizing in his mind that holding hands is just meaningless contact between layers of skin, while Su Muqing remains frightened, not knowing what he is plotting. The young man recognizes in his mind that, even arguing logically, his colleague probably wouldn't agree to do it willingly. That's when he starts to concoct a rather absurd hypothesis in his head to try and resolve the situation. He imagines the scene of kneeling and begging to hold Su Muqing's hand, trying to predict what the girl's embarrassed reaction would be. Hearing all that madness through her telepathy, Su Muqing becomes desperate and wonders what's wrong with him today. The teacher notices the girl acting strangely and asks if she needs anything, startling her. The young woman tries to disguise her actions by saying she's just going to keep the exams, but ends up getting confused with her own steps. In the blink of an eye, she trips badly and falls flat on the living room floor, scattering papers everywhere. The teacher rushes anxiously to help her, but Su Muqing is so embarrassed and confused by Chu Shun's thoughts that her nose starts to bleed. The entire class goes on alert at the sudden bleeding, while Chu Shun runs anxiously towards her to see if she's all right. In the midst of the confusion, he thinks he needs to get her to the infirmary quickly, but soon realizes that this could be the perfect opportunity he's been waiting for. To Su Muqing's dismay, he begins to mentally celebrate that this is the golden opportunity sent from heaven to finally hold her hand. The teacher loudly calls for someone to help the girl get to the infirmary immediately. Chu Shun wastes no time and volunteers immediately, asking the teacher to entrust him with this important mission. He advances towards her enveloped in an aura of total determination, leaving Su Muqing in utter panic at his approach. To prevent him from getting any closer, the girl jumps up and extends her hand, shouting that she doesn't need any help. She runs out of the classroom in despair, assuring everyone that she is perfectly fine and can go to the infirmary alone. With her face completely red, she runs down the hallway thinking that Chu Shun's intentions of holding her hand are totally inappropriate. Meanwhile, an awkward silence falls over the classroom immediately after the girl's sudden escape. Chu Shun is completely confused and wonders why she's running away from him with such a red face, thinking she must be very sick. Looking at the floating system, he realizes with a sigh that the time to complete the mission is running out quickly. He reads the details of the task of holding hands with Su Muqing and the terrible punishment of losing his speech if he fails, lamenting that this challenge is too difficult. Later, outside of school, Chu Shun waits at the bus stop while trying to focus her attention on a spy novel. He tries to draw inspiration from the tactics of secret agents who remain constantly alert and ready to act at any moment. Furthermore, he decides to seek help online and posts an urgent question on a science forum about how to hold the hand of a girl he has never spoken to. However, users think it's just a silly joke, and the site administrator ends up deleting the post because it's unrelated to the forum's topic. Annoyed by the rejection, he types up an absurd story pretending to be an alien to see if someone will finally give him some useful advice. In this, he recalls that the only reason he can leave school early is because he has the privilege of being the #1 student. But while this position brings advantages, he feels it also carries a real curse. Instead of studying regular subjects, he now finds himself forced to analyze espionage tactics in an attempt to get closer to his colleague who is at the same location. This is all because Su Muqing herself, who shares the same privilege of leaving early, is right there outside tying her hair up. Chushun flashes a confident Machiavellian smile, thinking that, thanks to the new system, he will soon be the only one to have these privileges at the school. He gets up, determined to put into practice the approach plan he had prepared in his head, leaving the girl on high alert. The boy takes a few steps towards her, murmuring thoughtfully. Suddenly he makes a sharp movement, bending his body forward, which greatly frightens Su Muqing. Thinking he's going to fulfill his fantasy of kneeling and begging for her hand in marriage, the young woman recoils in terror, begging him to stop. She screams in panic, begging him not to do it under any circumstances. The girl tries to stop him from continuing, thinking he's about to declare his love right there in the middle of the street. However, an awkward silence ensues when she realizes he only bent down to tie his own shoelaces. Chushun looks up, completely bewildered by her exaggerated reaction, and asks what's wrong with her. He observes her defensive posture and wrongly deduces that she is acting superior, as if she were ordering him to stand up. Feeling challenged, he adjusts his glasses and announces that he can tie his own shoes without needing any help. Su Muqing is completely confused when she realizes the terrible misunderstanding, as he asks her what she thought she heard. Taking advantage of the bus's arrival, the extremely embarrassed girl runs to board and hurriedly says goodbye to escape. Chushun then gets into the same vehicle and holds on to the handrail, finding her colleague's behavior extremely bizarre today. He spots the girl sitting at the back of the bus, hugging her backpack, and decides to go towards her. His shadow falls upon her as he thinks to himself that his strategic plan has already begun. The young man stops right in front of her seat and calls her name, making Su Muqing tremble with nervousness, unsure of what to expect. With a serious and mysterious look, Chushun directly asks her what her hip circumference is, leaving the young woman shocked by his audacity. He then logically explains that the bus seating has recently been expanded and begins calculating the space needed to sit next to her. Chushun starts making bizarre calculations about Su Muqing's hip circumference, leaving the girl completely horrified and speechless during the conversation. He goes on to explain complex mathematical formulas to define the approximate area her body occupies on the seat. The young man concludes that, considering the actual physical space, she would only need to move a little bit for the two of them to be able to share the same bench. Su Muqing's face burned with shame upon hearing the absurd proposal of sharing the same seat on the bus. His real intention, of course, was to get very close to her, so he'd have the perfect excuse to hold her hand and complete the system's blessed mission. However, the young woman throws reality in his face when she notices that the bus is completely empty, making the young man realize his silly mistake of not looking around. Frustrated by his failed argument, Chushun sits down and begins to devise a new strategic plan, leaving his colleague tense about what might come next. He notices that the bus is about to make a sharp turn and decides that this is the perfect moment to act. Chushun warns that they are about to suffer the effects of centrifugal force because of the curve, leaving Su Muqing completely confused by that technical explanation. He launches into a lengthy speech about physics to justify that, to avoid being thrown, the best scientific option is for them to hold hands immediately. The boy insists that this would help stabilize their posture, while the girl just watches him with an expression of utter disbelief. Su Muqing decided to refute his scientific argument on the spot, suddenly feeling much more willing to debate. Using her own advanced knowledge of physics, she gives a veritable lesson and completely dismantles his theory, making it abundantly clear that she is not to be touched. The young woman concludes that the best course of action for both of their safety is to remain isolated in their own seats, leaving Chushun completely speechless and shocked. Unsatisfied, he still tries to counterattack using the laws of thermodynamics to convince her, but the discussion is interrupted by the bus's warning signal. The sound system announced that the next stop was Bayun Street, indicating that the girl's journey was coming to an end. Su Muqing hastily bids farewell, stating that this is his point, leaving Chushun devastated at having all his arguments refuted so brilliantly. As she walks towards the exit, the young woman realizes, her face flushed, that without them noticing, they ended up talking the entire bus ride. Before she goes downstairs, Chushun calls her name seriously in the middle of the empty hallway. Su Muqing turned slowly, sensing that the decisive moment she had so dreaded had finally arrived. She reflects on how Chu Shun's mind seemed blocked to her telepathy today, receiving only confused fragments of thoughts. The girl recalls hearing vague words about acceptance and holding hands at the bus stop, which seemed like an imminent declaration of love. Adding to that his desperate attempts to strike up a conversation on the bus, she was absolutely certain that the young man was about to confess his feelings. Determined to avoid the situation, Su Muqing bows formally and apologizes, rejecting the boy before he can even say anything. But Chu Shun just stares at her seriously and says that next time, things will be very different. The girl was completely confused, not understanding where the conversation was going. In a dramatic manner, pointing at her, the young man declares that next time he will surpass her in her studies once and for all. The bus departs, leaving Su Muqing completely speechless and dumbfounded in the middle of the sidewalk. Upon realizing that he was talking about grades and not romance, she blushes with embarrassment and murmurs that he's just a very strange fool. Later, during a family dinner, Chu Shun senses that the atmosphere in her home is strangely tense and different from usual. He watches his parents in silence and is absolutely certain that something is very wrong with the atmosphere at that dinner. The young man observes his mother, who usually works making sweets at home, and lately has been focused on creating content for the internet. Next, he looks at his father, a music teacher who is partially retired after undergoing vocal cord surgery. Chu Shun knows that the two love to gossip and give each other life advice during meals, which makes today's silence even more suspicious. He wonders if they found out he came in second place again and are now too embarrassed to try and console him. But he quickly dismisses the idea, remembering that his parents never cared that much about his grades and always considered second place a great achievement. Faced with so much mystery, Chu Shun decides to break the ice and asks directly if the two are hiding some secret from him. The father sighs deeply and warns that before revealing the matter, they need to apologize to their son. The young man stands up confidently and says he already knows what it's about, assuring that there's no need for any apology. The father is deeply moved by his son's attitude, proud to see how much the young man seems to have matured. That's when Chu Shun calmly asks when the mother became pregnant with their second child, making the father spit out his drink in shock. The parents panic over the misunderstanding, while the young man continues to say that he perfectly understands their desire to have another child. The mother quickly interrupts him, irritated, and reveals that their real concern is whether their own son is in love with someone at school. Chu Shun is extremely offended by the insinuation and demands that his parents be more careful with their words, considering it an insult. To prove her point, the mother places a notebook on the table and demands that he explain the meaning of all the notes written there. The young man remembers when he became obsessed with resolving the issues that caused him to lose first place to Su Muqing, filling the forms with her name in anger. However, he realizes that, for the parents, seeing a girl's name written repeatedly on an entire sheet of paper seemed like clear proof of love. With no way out, Chu Shun runs to her room shouting that she will only speak in the presence of her lawyer, leaving her parents outraged by her escape. Outside the room, the mother confesses to her husband her fear that her son has gone crazy from studying so much, hoping that he might finally be dating someone. She laments that the boy has never brought a single friend home, worried that he shows no interest in girls like other young men his age. The mother continues her outburst, revealing that while using Chu Shun's computer the other day, she ended up seeing something very worrying in her browsing history. She recounts, horrified, that his history was filled with video lessons and online courses in advanced university-level mathematics. Upon hearing that his son is already studying complex university-level content, the father anxiously agrees that this is certainly not normal for a young person. The mother then mentions that she met Su Muqing at the last school reunion, describing her as a beautiful and very intelligent girl who has even skipped a grade. Knowing that the girl always gets top marks, the father lets out a relieved laugh and says that he finally understands why his son is so focused on her. In this, the narration suggests that, despite appearances and the parents' distrust, Chu Shun's obsession may have nothing to do with romance. In his room, the young man bitterly laments having received a slightly lower grade than on the previous exam. He is tormented by not having been able to finish the last question on time, while his great rival Su Muqing once again achieved the maximum score. Every time Chu Shun thinks about that point difference, he feels like a defeated warrior from ancient times plotting his grand historical revenge. He sees himself as a humiliated loser in the face of his rival, but promises himself that one day he will erase this dishonor from his academic career. With a somber and focused look, he vows that all the humiliation of the past will be duly avenged and overcome. He recognizes that, even calculating everything perfectly, he is still limited by the exam time, deciding that he needs to resort to extraordinary methods. At this point, Chushun decides to invoke the power of the study system to finally test the potential of his new cards. He mentally confirms the command to equip the common rarity absolute focus skill on his profile. An impressive energy is activated around him, guaranteeing a considerable bonus in his learning efficiency and speed of reasoning. The young man feels as if he is floating in the middle of the cosmos and experiences an incredible sensation of tranquility and inner peace. His mind becomes completely clear and free from any distracting thoughts, leaving only his purest and deepest obsession with his studies. When he returns to solving the problems at his desk, he feels the answers flow perfectly, and that time itself seems to slow down around him. He happily confirms that his resolution speed has indeed increased with the use of the system's new capability. Doing the math, the boy realizes that this small bonus actually guarantees valuable extra minutes of free time during math exams. Excited, he imagines how absurd this power would be if he could elevate it to the legendary rarity of the rainbow, perhaps obtaining instant answers. He smiles in a somewhat frightening way, eager for the next day to arrive so he can meet Su Ching again and test his newfound strength. Meanwhile, back at home, Su Ching feels a strange, icy chill run down her back right after getting out of the shower. The girl suspects that some fool must be talking about her behind her back, remembering that she ended up talking quite a bit with that strange colleague today. To make matters worse on her cold night, the hot water from the shower suddenly disappears again, causing her to complain about the suffering of the icy shower. The following morning, Chushun walks down the street completely exhausted from having spent the entire night studying under the draining effects of his ability. But his weariness vanishes when he spots Su Ching perched in a tree next to a little girl, and he becomes very confused by the scene. Upon noticing his presence, the girl is surprised and says that he arrived at the exact moment to help them. Chushun immediately begins to mentally mock her, asking if she was caught stealing the child's balloon and climbed the tree to escape. He even picks up his cell phone, pretending to call the police to help the little girl, leaving Su Ching extremely annoyed by the prank. She explains that the real situation is quite different and that she only stopped to help the little girl when she saw that her balloon had gotten stuck in the branches. The young woman reports that she tried every possible way to climb the tree trunk to reach the toy, but all her efforts were in vain, for she ended up slipping and was unable to reach the highest branch. After hearing the entire explanation, the boy finally understands what really happened there. He sums it up by saying they just need to rescue the balloon, but robotically confesses that he hasn't yet unlocked the ability to climb trees. The girl is at a loss for what to do next, while Chushun stares at her mysteriously in silence. Suddenly, he adjusts his glasses with a competitive look and challenges his colleague to a contest. He proposes seeing who can come up with the best idea to retrieve the balloon first, leaving the young woman suspicious that he might ask for something strange if he wins. After all, Su Ching hadn't forgotten the absurd thoughts she'd heard from him yesterday about holding hands anyway. With this distrust in mind, the girl's affection for him begins to plummet rapidly and dramatically. Chushun asks what happens if he loses the challenge, and she replies curtly that a defeat is just a defeat and nothing more. But, by focusing her attention on him for a moment, the young woman ends up hearing what is really going on in the young man's heart. To her surprise, his true belief is that a real man would never leave a little girl crying without doing anything to help. Touched by his hidden kindness, Su Ching blushes and thinks he's just a proud fool who doesn't know how to express himself properly, causing her affection for him to rise again. Chushun begins preparing by mentally rehearsing how retrieving objects from trees is a classic problem faced by humanity since prehistoric times. He runs determined to use the laws of physics to his advantage to overcome that challenge in an intelligent way. He mentally calculates the horizontal speed he needs to reach in the run-up to be able to glide to the exact point below the balloon. The young man defines the perfect parabolic trajectory in his mind, calculating each angle and force with mathematical precision. He leaps into the air, planning to reach the ideal height, using the strength of his legs to accurately cover the target. Finally, he uses the laws of torque and forcefully throws his backpack towards the branches, taking advantage of the object's moment of inertia to ingeniously bring down the balloon. Chushun throws her backpack, but she misses her target and ends up getting caught in the branches right next to the balloon. He is shocked to see that his plan failed by a very narrow margin, unable to understand how he miscalculated. Due to the momentum of the jump, the boy loses his balance in the air and plummets backward, while Su Muqing runs desperately to try and catch him. In the end, he falls directly on top of her in the grass, leaving the girl extremely embarrassed by the sudden physical proximity. The two of them end up lying in a super embarrassing position, causing Su Muqing to stammer and beg him to get off her as soon as possible. After parting ways, they both sat on the floor in complete silence, blushing with embarrassment at the awkward situation. Chushun becomes distraught and begins to grumble that something went wrong with his perfect calculations, under Su Muqing's confused gaze. Determined not to give up, the young man declares that he still has one last option and takes Su Muqing's red backpack. He holds her backpack and lectures her about how the great advantage humans have is knowing how to use tools, while the girl desperately begs him to stop. Ignoring her protests, he lifts the other person's backpack, ready to make another strategic throw. The boy mentally recalculates the entire parabolic trajectory, using the same physics concepts to launch the new projectile. He throws the object forcefully, but, to his utter disappointment, the second backpack also ends up getting stuck at the top of the tree. They stand there staring at the tree in silence, and Su Muqing remarks ironically that now they are both without their backpacks, while he tries to hide his embarrassment. Seeing that the situation had only worsened, the little girl burst into tears and began to cry loudly over the lost balloon. A short time later, a tall boy who played basketball and his girlfriend managed to rescue everything, receiving sincere thanks from the little girl and Su Muqing. The player even comments to his girlfriend that Chushun seems to have talent for the sport, but the young man is in a corner, completely depressed by his own failure. Disgruntled, Chushun mutters that it's impossible to have been wrong twice in a row and begins to question whether reality itself is flawed. As they walk towards school, he tries to salvage what's left of his pride by suggesting that the dispute ended in a draw, and the girl simply agrees, finding it amusing. Su Muqing calmly explains that, in real life, unlike written exams, it is impossible to ignore factors such as air resistance. She goes on to demonstrate that ideal physical models don't work with irregular objects full of straps, like a school backpack. The young woman also demonstrates that human muscle strength always exhibits slight variations, leading Chushun to believe that she is merely trying to protect his pride. The boy stares at her thoughtfully as he listens to his colleague's detailed explanation. It is at this moment that he realizes that this is the first time he has seen Su Muqing smile so sincerely and beautifully. Suddenly, some students run past in desperation, warning that the dreaded Professor Wang is controlling the entrance and that they absolutely cannot be late. Professor Wang Lihong appears imposingly at the school entrance, rigorously monitoring tardiness and demanding proper behavior from the students with her intimidating temperament. She starts giving harsh reprimands to everyone who passes by, complaining about one person's long hair, another's lack of uniform, and even demanding that they shave. The students flee in terror to the classroom, commenting amongst themselves about how that inspector is a real nightmare at the school. Observing the courtyard, Wang Lihong focuses her stern gaze and assures herself that no violation of school rules will go unpunished before her. She clenches her fists with determination, vowing to put an end to any inappropriate behavior on campus. However, something catches the teacher's eye right in the middle of the main courtyard. She catches Chushun and Su Muqing walking very close together and is outraged at the thought that two students are daring to show intimacy at school. Wang Lihong's mind begins to wander with resentment, finding it unfair that young people are dating while she, at 36, remains single due to fate. She shakes her head, remembering her duty as an educator, and decides that she will ruthlessly crush any sign of youthful romance she finds. Meanwhile, oblivious to the danger, Chushun approaches Su Muqing to gently remove a leaf that had become stuck in her hair. The teacher appears, pointing her finger in an intimidating manner and orders the two to stop immediately where they are. The two calmly turned to each other and greeted her politely, leaving the woman in a state of complete shock upon recognizing their faces. Wang Lihong is thrown into despair when he realizes that the supposed couple consists of his two best students and the institution's greatest academic prides. She begins to imagine the worst possible scenarios if they start dating, visualizing Chushun transforming into a rebellious motorcycle delinquent. In her fertile mind, she also imagines Su Muqing dropping out of school to become a rebellious digital influencer on the internet. The teacher cries desperately, anticipating that her salary bonus and excellent performance evaluation will be ruined because of the couple's romance. Hearing all that desperate drama through her telepathy, Su Muqing is at a loss for how to react to the teacher's bizarre paranoia. Determined to prevent this tragic future from happening, Wang Lihong grabs Chu Shun by the shoulder and tensely warns him that she needs to have a serious conversation with him. She takes him to the garden and points to some flower buds, explaining that nature needs time and that forcing things too early can ruin everything. The teacher poetically explains that picking fruit out of season leads to disappointment, indirectly trying to warn him about the dangers of early dating. She asks if he understood the metaphor, and the young man assures her with complete conviction that he understood the message perfectly. However, Chu Shun adjusts his glasses defiantly and warns that, with all due respect, he doesn't agree with her approach at all. He explains that he will never stop studying the humanities subjects just to focus on the exact sciences she teaches, leaving the professor completely frustrated by his misinterpretation. Realizing he was being too subtle, Wang Lihong decides he needs to change his strategy to make himself understood by the boy. She then begins to speak more directly about how feelings of affection between young people their age are perfectly normal and beautiful. The teacher romantically describes that magical feeling of focusing one's gaze on someone in the afternoon light, or recognizing the laughter of a loved one in the middle of a crowd. The teacher continues her moving account of how this feeling makes a person smile foolishly at their notebooks and relive every simple conversation in the silence of the night. Wang Lihong adds that the person begins to wish that the journeys would never end and that the days would seem to brighten early in the morning upon seeing the face of the one they love. Completely impatient with her sentimentality, Chu Shun interrupts the speech, stating loudly that she already understands everything. The boy asks directly if she is suggesting that he start dating, leaving the teacher paralyzed and shocked by such a literal interpretation. Wang Lihong becomes deeply irritated, thinking that the boy is merely feigning ignorance and deliberately changing the subject due to his youthful pride. Hearing all that confusing discussion, Su Muqing decides to intervene immediately to prevent the misunderstanding from jeopardizing her scholarship application. She hurries over and assures the teacher that the two simply met by chance on the way and that nothing strange is going on between them. But Wang Lihong flashes a wide, unsettling smile, interpreting the girl's actions as a heroic attempt to protect her beloved from a teacher's scolding. The teacher begins to fantasize that she is witnessing a true cliché romance of mutual protection, becoming absolutely certain that it is a case of early courtship. Su Muqing becomes desperate upon overhearing these thoughts, considering the teacher a complete lunatic with her mind entirely focused on forced romances. The girl asks if they can leave now, and with the teacher's confused permission, the two young people quickly say goodbye and head to their self-study class. Wang Lihong watches them leave and still finds the closeness between the two somewhat suspicious, especially given how Chu Shun has been acting lately. She recalls with suspicion the boy's desperation the previous day when he ran to help his classmate who had fallen on the classroom floor. The teacher also recalls seeing the young man admiring the list of grade rankings and caressing Su Muqing's name, unaware that he was actually feeling anger. She even theorizes that he was sniffing her colleague's desk without imagining that Chu Shun was merely mystically analyzing the place in search of the secret behind her high grades. Wang Lihong concludes that the boy is suffering silently from unrequited love, and Su Muqing is completely shocked to grasp all that paranoia. The young woman stares at her colleague's back, completely terrified at the thought that he might have been secretly obsessed with her all this time. She feels her face burning with shame and thinks to herself that the whole situation is becoming too frightening. Later, upon entering the classroom at 7:45, Chu Shun is alerted by the system that there are less than 13 hours left until the mission deadline. The young man despairs in his thoughts because he has not yet had even a single opportunity to get close to and hold Su Muqing's hand. At that moment, his colleague Fang Yuan appears perched on one of the desks, dramatically lecturing about how life should be much more than just surviving. The boy begins listing his ostentatious dreams of expensive cars and yachts, causing Chu Shun to grumble that his friend has already started with his daily fantasies again. The boy advises his friend to go to a temple to make wishes or wait until bedtime to dream, causing Fang Yuan to jump down from his seat. Chu Shun states that, in order to defend scientific ideology, he prefers to distance himself from those superstitions and keep away from his colleague. Fang Yuan kneels on the chair and extends a small plush keychain, offering the object as a special gift to his friend. The boy begs, crying, to spend the week at his father's house, fearing his father's fury upon discovering the disastrous results of his latest school grades. Chushun coldly accepts the keychain, but bluntly warns his friend to forget about spending the week at his house. He justifies his refusal by revealing precise statistics on how Fang Yuan's noisy presence constantly disrupts his concentration on his studies. The young man explains that his friend's level of distraction is intolerable for his study environment, comparing his friend's stay to putting a noisy monkey in a laboratory. Fang Yuan becomes furious and accuses his friend of treating him as a danger to his studies instead of acting as a true companion during difficult times. The boy grumbles in annoyance and comments that it's no wonder that Su Muqing, besides having excellent grades, always manages to outperform Chu Shun. The mere mention of her rival's name causes Chu Shun's eyes to flash intensely in immediate alarm. The boy lunges at his colleague, demanding to know exactly what he had just said in the previous sentence. Fang Yuan repeats the phrase about an element that hinders studies in a frightened way, and Chu Shun smiles, realizing he can use his classmate to destabilize Su Muqing's focus. But the young man remembers that, before devising this plan, he still needs to accomplish the urgent mission of finding an excuse to hold his rival's hand. At that moment, his cell phone vibrates with the receipt of a new text message. It's his mother asking him to stop by the family's old rented property after class to check on a problem with the heater reported by the tenant. Chu Shun indignantly complains about having to waste time on this, thinking he would rather spend his free hours planning his approach to Su Muqing. Hearing this from afar, the girl blushes intensely, noticing that her classmate remains obsessed with trying to get close to her at all costs. Shortly after, the lunch bell rings and the students rush desperately out of the classroom towards the cafeteria. Fang Yuan hurriedly pulls Chu Shun aside to tell him about the dish of the day, but the boy looks back and notices that Su Muqing is still sitting at her desk. He is surprised and annoyed to see that his rival did not get up to have lunch with the others. The boy complains angrily when he realizes that the girl continues studying even during recess, considering her a relentless and stubborn rival. A few hours pass, and dusk begins to take over the entire city at 7:55 p.m. Su Muqing walks slowly back home, feeling feverish and weak after taking a cold bath the previous night and going without food all day. The girl puts her hand in her shorts pocket, searching for a solution to her biggest problem at the moment. She pulls out a few coins and begins to count her change listlessly in the middle of the empty street. With a sad sigh, she realizes she only has 7.5 coins and that she still has 4 long days to go before receiving her scholarship. Looking at an old family photo frame, the girl remembers that things weren't always so difficult and tight during her childhood. She cries as she recalls her parents' painful divorce and the unexpected debts that ended up burdening her and her single mother's lives. She sadly recalls that, faced with an astronomical debt impossible to repay, the entire structure of her family life quickly crumbled. Although she was admitted to the school with honors and received generous scholarships that covered her studies, the funds she received were not enough to change her reality. The money from her school achievements was just a drop in the ocean compared to the huge debt, but she and her mother made strict budgets to try to pay the monthly installments. However, the grandmother ended up getting sick, and the mother had to stop working to take care of her, leaving the young girl alone with only 7.5 coins to survive. Su Muqing knows she can't simply ask her mother for more money, as her mother is already unemployed and facing an extremely difficult financial situation. She painfully remembers seeing her mother humiliating herself in front of relatives just to be able to pay for her daughter's school expenses. Holding the doorknob of her house, the girl vows to herself that she will never again allow her mother to go through that embarrassing situation. Trying to keep her head held high, she enters the apartment determined to save as much as possible to overcome this difficult period. She begins to arrange the simple groceries she bought on the kitchen table, planning her restricted diet for the next few days of survival. His inventory consists only of packets of instant noodles, discounted eggs, and a few stored vitamins, calculated exactly to the limit of his tight budget. The girl is focused on her goal of holding on for just 4 more days, which is the time remaining before her long-awaited scholarship is released. But suddenly, a strange noise coming from inside the silent apartment catches the young woman's attention and puts her on alert. She covers her mouth in fright when she realizes there is someone else inside her house, unable to contain the panic of the moment. The girl immediately imagines that a thief has broken into the apartment, lamenting with outrage that even such a humble home is being targeted in a robbery. Quickly grabbing a broom, she walks down the hallway and shouts firmly to intimidate the would-be intruder. Su Muqing points the broom towards the bathroom and threatens the intruder, assuring him that she has already called the police and demanding that he leave immediately. However, oblivious to the danger outside, Chu-shun is inside the bathroom wearing headphones and happily singing his favorite song. He finally removes his headphones upon noticing a muffled noise and wonders if the tenant has just returned to the apartment. Before entering, the young man had called the tenant's mother and obtained permission to use the spare key to repair the property's water heater. With the authorization in hand, he had entered the apartment calmly a few minutes earlier to carry out the service. Upon stepping into the room, the young man nostalgically recalls that this old apartment had been his own family's home for over 10 years. He notices that the place remains identical to the past and realizes that, although it is rented to third parties, the space seems quite cozy and well-maintained. Chu-shun goes straight to the bathroom to check the old heater and notices it's the same simple problem as always. The guy pulls out a new battery and replaces the dead one to get the device working perfectly again. While making the exchange, he smells a familiar scent of soap in the air that vaguely reminds him of someone he knows. Suddenly, Su Mu-ching's furious shout, ordering him to get out of the bathroom, echoes menacingly from the other side of the door. Startled by the sudden scream, Chu-shun quickly turns around, not understanding what is happening outside. In the midst of the shock, the boy ends up dropping the used battery on the bathroom floor, making a metallic noise echo through the room. He quickly bends down to pick up the object that just rolled to his feet. At that exact moment, Su Mu-ching kicked the bathroom door open with all her might, aggressively bursting into the space armed with her broom. Chu-shun reacts quickly and manages to block the blow with her hands, startling the girl with her quick reflexes. As he grabs her foot to defend himself, he smells that soap scent again and is certain he knows where he knows that smell from. Su Mu-ching loses her balance and starts screaming desperately for the boy to release her leg immediately. The young man finally recognizes the intruder's face and asks in surprise if she is indeed his classmate. Chu-shun quickly makes the mental connections, associating the familiar soap scent with the phone call he had made earlier to the tenant. Pointing deductively, the boy happily concludes that she is the person living in his family's rented apartment. But Su Mu-ching completely panics and starts screaming, remembering his conversations about wanting to get closer to her and thinking that he followed her all the way home. She concludes, horrified, that the young man is actually a dangerous stalker who criminally broke into her bathroom. The girl's fertile mind envisions the worst possible scenarios of danger because she is alone with him at home, leading her to utter despair at the situation. She steps back, brandishing the broom, and warns that she will call the police immediately to report the break-in. Chu-shun is completely bewildered by her exaggerated panic reaction, finding her colleague's horrified expression upon seeing him there strange. He quickly realizes that his sudden presence there does indeed seem suspicious, and that he needs to explain himself quickly before the situation gets even worse. The young man runs out of the bathroom, urging her to calm down and listen to logical explanations before taking any drastic action. He quickly states that the property belongs to his family, that he had the tenant's permission, and that he only came to change the batteries in the water heater. Still suspicious, Su Mu-ching orders him not to come near and warns that she will make a phone call to confirm the whole story before believing it. She calls her mother, who calmly confirms that the landlord's son had indeed gone to the apartment to fix the water heater. Embarrassed by the terrible misunderstanding, the girl bows, offering sincere apologies, and Chu-shun assures her that he understands her fright, but decides to give her some serious advice. He scolds her, explaining that confronting a supposed intruder was extremely dangerous, while Su Mu-ching merely listens to the lesson with regret. The young man finishes the job by informing her that the water heater is now working perfectly and that she will finally have hot water for her shower tonight. He says goodbye and leaves, surprised to find out that his classmate is the tenant of the place, and remembering that his mother had mentioned the financial difficulties of that family. Chu-shun continues to think about the fact that Su Mu-ching and her mother are facing a huge debt on their own, lamenting that she never imagined her rival would go through so many difficulties. Hearing everything clearly through her telepathy, the girl is paralyzed and falls into absolute silence as she sees the truth revealed. Su Mu-ching realizes that her colleague has discovered her entire financial situation, but decides not to worry too much about it because she is already used to the hardships of her life. She recalls that she always hated other people's pity and preferred to focus on being the best student to earn real respect, instead of receiving looks of pity and indifference. Despite her efforts to become a model student, she sadly recalls still hearing malicious and envious comments from her classmates behind her back. Given this, the girl wonders if Chu-shun will also begin to see her as inferior, or if he will act with the same feigned pity that others usually show. However, the boy's mind takes a completely different turn when he thinks that Su Muqing is, in fact, an extremely frightening opponent. The girl is surprised to hear her classmate internally lamenting and calling her a genius in a disgruntled manner. Chushun is indignant to notice that, even facing such serious problems, she never let her grades drop and continues to outperform him in her studies. The boy vows to do his best to beat her fairly in the exams, and Su Muqing is deeply touched by his proud determination. The girl gives a discreet little laugh and fondly considers how her classmate manages to be such a persistent and stubborn fool. Interrupting her thoughts, Chushun clears her throat and decides to ask her colleague a direct question. He asks if she needs money and mysteriously hints that she has a significant advantage. Su Muqing completely misunderstands the comment, thinking he is suggesting she do something inappropriate or shameful to earn money. Completely furious and indignant, she yells, asking what he meant by that absurd insinuation about her. The girl rants like an angry puppy, insisting that she's not that kind of girl, leaving Chushun completely confused and unable to understand her reaction. She even visualizes ridiculous and bizarre scenarios in her mind about what the boy might be suggesting she do. Chushun immediately cuts her off, assuring her that his plan is completely legal, leaving the girl confused. Su Muqing apologizes awkwardly for the misunderstanding, blaming her colleague's confusing words for making her think nonsense. The young man holds her shoulders and insists that she truly has excellent appeal to get what she needs. He explains that the fact that she came in first place on the school entrance exam is the best possible argument in her favor. Chushun dramatically becomes agitated, complaining about how people only care about whoever comes in first place. The boy deeply regrets the fact that no one cares about the second-place finisher, which is precisely his position. In his dramatic imagination, he sees himself carrying the burden of eternally being second in the world without receiving the slightest attention from anyone. To him, any casual comment coming from Su Muqing feels like a sharp sword piercing his pride. The young man feels that all his determination and academic effort are constantly put to the test by her commanding presence. He finds himself utterly defeated by the relentless genius of his great academic rival. Still, Chushun adjusts his glasses and vows to himself that today he will be able to change this situation once and for all. He explains that no student would refuse private lessons from someone who achieved the top score on the exam, suggesting that she work as a tutor. Su Muqing admits that she had considered this possibility before, but unfortunately had never met anyone who needed help with their studies. The young man immediately breaks into a smile and excitedly announces that he knows the perfect person to hire her tutoring services. The girl is thrilled at the real possibility of getting a job and helping with household expenses. She asks suspiciously if he will charge a commission for the referral, and Chushun immediately denies it. He smiles mysteriously, warning that time in high school is short and that tutoring someone else could end up harming their own academic performance. The young man questions her about what her choice would be between maintaining her excellent grades or getting the money she so desperately needs. Without hesitating for even a second, Su Muqing firmly declares that she accepts the tutor position no matter what. Chushun tries to insist that the work will be very time-consuming and that her grades might drop, but the girl seems quite confident in her ability to handle everything. She asks her colleague to come closer and warns him that she will reveal a special secret about herself. With a mischievous smile, Su Muqing whispers that she has the incredible ability to never forget absolutely anything she has ever learned in life. Chushun falls to the ground lost in thought at that humiliating display of genius, feeling his pride crushed once again. Taking advantage of the situation, the young woman runs to the kitchen and kindly offers to prepare something for the young man to eat. The young man smiles victoriously as he realizes that his secret Trojan horse plan has finally been put into action. He mentally explains that the student who needs help is a true school nightmare, who has already scared away the best teachers and specialists in the city. For Chushun, this mysterious student is a veritable black hole of knowledge that repels any kind of wisdom and intelligence around her. The boy celebrates happily, thinking that his rival will finally experience defeat while trying to teach someone so difficult, leveling the playing field between the two. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Su Muqing realizes that she acted impulsively and remembers that she has almost no ingredients left in her pantry due to lack of money. She is worried about offering such a humble and simple meal to a guest in her home. Chushun suddenly appears behind her, analytically writing in her notebook, startling the girl with his silent and sudden approach. Su Muqing tries to hide her embarrassment by holding a pot of lard and timidly assures everyone that noodles with lard are a very tasty meal. Chu Shun meticulously analyzes the ingredients and arrives at the brilliant conclusion that this simplicity is actually a true culinary work of art. Analyzing the few ingredients available, Chu Shun begins to calculate the proportions of noodles, egg, and lard, concluding that this is the most efficient combination for the brain. He reflects on how nutrients aid in neural transmission and realizes that the normal diets of ordinary people only serve to confuse the mind. The boy even cries with emotion when he thinks about the time and money he will save to buy more study materials, while Su Muqing watches him in the kitchen, completely bewildered. Upon taking the first bite of the noodles prepared by his colleague, Chu Shun is amazed and confesses that the food is simply delicious. Su Muqing smiled sweetly and happily as she watched the boy eat with such relish, feeling relieved that he had approved of her simple recipe. After they finish their meal, the young man lets out a sigh of satisfaction and formally thanks his colleague for dinner. Still a little awkward, Su Muqing offers to treat him to a nice dinner as soon as he receives the money for the tutoring job he recommended. Chu Shun looks at her, quite surprised by such a kind and unexpected proposal. At that point, the girl takes the initiative to firmly hold his hand in the middle of the living room. She is sincerely grateful for the help with the job opportunity, regardless of the final outcome of that story. With a radiant smile, Su Muqing insists that she will make sure to prepare a real feast for him on his next visit. At that moment, a colored light shines brightly, indicating that the system's friendship mission has finally been completed. Chu Shun is completely shocked to realize that a simple handshake of gratitude was enough to complete the challenge. The following Saturday, the boy's mother drags him out of the house to buy groceries and visit his uncle, leaving the young man complaining about wasting money. He starts listing from memory all the forgotten foods they already have stored in the refrigerator that could very well be used. Chu Shun gestures dramatically, insisting that it would be possible to improvise a complete banquet without spending a single penny at the market. The mother loses her patience and gives him a smack on the head for being so stingy, while a new economic skill of the system begins to vibrate in the boy's mind. Upon stepping into the market, the young man feels an overwhelming energy take over his body, experiencing what he calls the true joy of the harvest. He poetically opens his arms in the middle of the produce aisle, embarrassing his mother and causing her to order him to hurry up and finish shopping. The woman goes straight to the stalls and starts using her best haggling tactics with the vendors to get discounts on the vegetables. She smiles victoriously as she snags some extra spices for free, vowing to always come back to buy there if the price is right. Satisfied with the outcome of her negotiations, she walks proudly while her son carries the heavy bags right behind her. Suddenly, the mother spots a familiar market vendor named Jane and immediately stops walking. Jane, known as the undefeated queen of the market, compliments the young man and offers him a special discount on the super fresh vegetables from her stall. The mother blocks her son's advance and tensely warns him that Jane is her greatest rival in life, the only merchant she has ever lost to in a haggling act. The two begin negotiating, and the mother asks the price of the vegetables, with Jane charging 5 coins per portion. The mother feigns indignation, asking if the leaves are made of gold and offering only 2 coins, but her rival retorts that they are special greenhouse products. While the two women intensely discuss the quality and price of the goods, Chu Shun feels an uncontrollable urge to intervene in the debate. Jane swears the cost price is too high and that she can't afford to lose profit margin, while her mother suspects it's all a lie from the shopkeeper. The boy tries to say something, but his mother interrupts him, telling him not to panic, as she will use her final technique of retreating before advancing. She laments Jane's lack of consideration after so many years of being a customer and pretends to leave, heading towards other stalls to see if her rival will call her back. But after a few minutes of slow walking, Jane remains focused on playing on her cell phone, showing no concern whatsoever about their departure. After some time, the mother repeats loudly that she is indeed leaving, but the market vendor simply drinks her juice calmly, ignoring the drama. The woman becomes extremely angry when she realizes that her tactic of pretending to leave has failed miserably against her rival. Chu Shun placed his hand on her shoulder seriously and asked her to rest, warning that he would take control of the negotiation from now on. Adjusting his glasses imposingly, the young man steps forward, determined to show off the results of his newfound calculation and bargaining skills. He points to the vegetables and offers a very low price for everything, making the market vendor laugh loudly and ask if the young man had been studying so much that he'd gone crazy. With a focused and calculating gaze, Chu-shun begins to list the exact percentage of dehydration and the time elapsed since the harvesting of those wilted leaves. Next, he analyzes the eggs by measuring their millimeter-sized proportions and deduces that the hens that laid them were stressed or malnourished. Jane becomes completely dizzy and terrified when bombarded with so many statistics, mathematical formulas, and scientific arguments about her merchandise. With the market vendor completely exhausted and out of arguments, the young man collects the purchases with a confident smile, having managed to get the maximum discount. The boy's mother is in shock and stares at him with her mouth agape, unable to understand how her son managed that veritable miracle of negotiation. She starts shaking the boy, asking if he's been possessed by some entity, reminding him that he's been acting very strangely since early on. Upon regaining consciousness of her actions, Chu-shun panics as she realizes the crazy things she has just done in public because of the system. Later that night, the boy found himself reliving in his memory that poignant moment when he held Su-mu-ching's hand. He vividly remembers the system's warning light confirming the successful completion of his first friendly fire mission. He recalls with satisfaction receiving experience points and a good amount of money deposited directly into his savings account. Then, the floating screen displays information about your newly acquired economic skill and reveals the challenging details of the system's next objective. Back in the reality of her room, Chu-shun analyzes her new achievements and prepares to face the next stages of her journey of evolution. The young man becomes worried upon reading that the new task requires him to hold Su-mu-ching's hand for a full minute, knowing it will be much more difficult. Determined to ignore his confused thoughts, Chu-shun decides to touch the floating system card to find out the effect of the new skill he just unlocked. The screen details that the activated trait grants bonuses in calculations and luck, in addition to activating an automatic money-saving mode that makes it much more persuasive. Although he finds the description somewhat bizarre, the boy lets out a confident laugh, feeling simply invincible with his newfound power. However, the reality of the market hits him hard, causing Chu-shun to cry with rage, as he realizes he endured immense humiliation just to gain such a silly power. At that moment, he lets out a deep sigh, remembering Su-mu-ching's sweet thanks as she held his hands so gently. Despite all the mishaps of the day, the young man tries to console himself by thinking that the effort was worthwhile to achieve his main goal. He reflects that, in order to finally beat his rival in his studies, he will still need to rely solely on his own daily effort and dedication. A short time later, Chu-shun and his mother arrive at his second uncle's luxurious apartment, where they are warmly welcomed by the family. The boy whispers to his mother, asking if she brought the equipment he had requested, receiving in return a tired look about his habit of overdoing the visits. Completely hooded and wearing a surgical mask, the young man carries a plate of sweets and dramatically asserts that this protection is absolutely necessary. As he stealthily makes his way down the dark hallway, he mentally prepares to introduce the troublesome student to Su-mu-ching. For Chu-shun, her cousin's room is like a den infected by the virus of academic failure, where ignorance is so contagious it could melt anyone's brain. Inside the silent room, 3 girls are gathered around a small table, attempting to summon a school spirit through a mysterious game. One of the friends recites the traditional verses in a solemn tone, asking the entity to manifest itself and reveal the answers they so desperately seek. The young women gripped a pencil tightly over an improvised board, anxiously awaiting any sign of supernatural movement on the paper. At that moment, Chu-shun sneaks open the door and asks with a menacing look if they've finished their homework. The fright is so great that the girls let out a desperate scream, believing that the spirit has truly manifested itself in the form of a masked killer. When the lights come on, the young girl with colorful hair and short clothes, named Chu-lan, recognizes the intruder and asks, confused, what her cousin is up to. The boy mocks their silly game and remarks that, after trying to build a tower of cards last week, they've now decided to use their intelligence on the afterlife. The friends are in a complete panic when they realize that the masked boy is Chu-lan's legendary genius cousin, known for eliminating any sign of school laziness. Terrified by the presence of that veritable study machine, the 2 classmates invent some excuse and run out of the room to do their homework. Chu-shun removes his mask, slightly hurt by their overreaction, and wonders if he really is that scary. Chu-lan points angrily, complaining that he should have knocked before entering, and criticizes her cousin's bizarre clothes, vowing that he'll never get a girlfriend. Upon analyzing her cousin, Chu-shun despairs at the system's information, which reveals that the girl possesses a rare ability that blocks any kind of learning. The boy takes off his black jacket and warns seriously that he will need to have a detailed conversation with his aunt about his cousin's failing grades and lack of focus. Chulan becomes desperate and jumps on him, begging him not to reveal anything about today's antics to her mother. The girl cries, clinging to her cousin, explaining that her mother had already threatened her with a harsh ear-pulling if she didn't study diligently that weekend. Chu Shun jokingly says that she has many cousins in her family and that losing one wouldn't make a difference, forcing the girl to apologize repeatedly in a dramatic manner. The young man points to the table and questions whether they were really playing that childish game, and Chulan quickly tries to deflect blame. He gives a real lesson explaining that the movements of the pencil are merely unconscious muscular reactions caused by breathing and air circulation. While her cousin pretends to agree with the scientific explanation, Chushun remembers a very important detail about how they held the pencil together. He recalls that the next mission requires holding hands with interlaced fingers, realizing that this technique from the game might be the ideal way to solve the problem. The boy asks if his cousin was upset with the tutor he managed to recommend, but Chulan assures him that the problem isn't with the person chosen. With a mischievous yet determined look, she reveals that her rebellious behavior towards her studies has another reason behind it. The girl confesses to herself that she always treated all her private tutors aggressively just to get them out of her life. She throws herself onto the bed, complaining that, as a dedicated athlete in school sports, she sees no need to focus so much on complex theoretical subjects. Chu Shun counters the argument by pointing out that even athletes need a minimum score to guarantee entry into elite high schools. The young man sits down in his study chair and begins to read the official requirements for the reserved spots for outstanding athletes in the region. He questions her about her previous rankings and whether she possesses any relevant national-level sports titles to present upon registration. With her face completely red with embarrassment, Chulan shyly confesses that her only medal was won in a simple competition in her own neighborhood. The young man sighs in disbelief, warning that with the ridiculous score she got on her last practice test, she'll never get a place at any reputable institution. Chu Shun points indignantly at his cousin's report card, asking if she can even read the test questions with such a poor performance. The girl hides her head in the pillow in embarrassment and starts yelling that she really has no talent for traditional learning. She recalls with a pout that even her cousin, who achieved the second highest grade in the entire city, has failed miserably in his attempts to tutor her. Chulan argues that if even her genius cousin couldn't make her understand the subjects, hiring another tutor would simply be a waste of her parents' money. But the boy gives a confident little smile and assures them that the situation this time will be completely different from the previous ones. Chushun explains that since his second-place ranking wasn't enough to teach her, he decided to bring the top-ranked student from the entire city's entrance exam. The young man calmly reveals Su Muqing's name, leaving his cousin wide-eyed at the revelation of her tutor's identity. Chulan immediately flashes a mischievous smile and recalls that her cousin always used to call this same girl her greatest rival throughout her academic life. His face flushed with embarrassment, Chu Shun stammers, assuring his cousin that they are now just good friends, prompting her to scoff at his obvious excuse. Chu Shun tells his cousin not to ask so many questions and demands to know if she will help him or not, making Chulan accept immediately without even knowing what he needs to do. With a mischievous grin on his face, the boy advises his cousin to simply act normally in front of Su Muqing when the tutoring sessions begin. His secret plan is to use Chulan's terrible reputation for academic failure to completely disrupt the brilliant mind of his great academic rival. The young man lets out a wicked and triumphant laugh, leaving his cousin completely confused about what kind of bizarre performance she was actually supposed to do. Chulan blushes and begins to wonder if her cousin is trying to use her natural cuteness to win Su Muqing's heart. She imagines the hilarious scene of being used as a sort of gift or stepping stone so that her cousin can finally confess his feelings to his colleague. Meanwhile, in the living room, the aunt and second uncle are talking to the boy's mother, wanting to know who the famous, brilliant tutor he decided to recommend is. The second uncle, a very muscular track and field coach, sighs worriedly and recalls how his daughter traumatized the last tutor to the point that the man gave up teaching. Chu Shun's father chuckles amusedly as he comments on the rumors that the former teacher has gone mad and is now trying to teach math to his farm hands. With a dramatic and serious expression, the uncle states that their family only has genes geared towards music and sports, considering his genius nephew a great exception. He adds that the boy had already given up trying to help his cousin before, finding it very strange that he suddenly decided to bring in a new tutor. Chu Xun suddenly bursts out of the room, slamming the door shut, and announces that the first tutoring test is already scheduled for the following day. The adults are surprised to learn that the cousin accepted the arrangement, and the uncle asks what grade the newly recommended tutor is in. The young man calmly reveals that the teacher is his classmate and repeats Su Muqing's name intently. The boy's mother's eyes widen, and she lets out a dramatic sigh of pure shock upon hearing the confirmation of the girl's name. The adults quickly began whispering, amongst themselves with ulterior motives, leaving Chu Xun quite confused by their sudden reaction. They feigned ignorance with forced smiles and thanked the young man for his initiative, who remains completely oblivious to the hidden intentions of his own family. The next day, Su Muqing waits at the bus stop with her backpack on her back, nervously checking the routes while waiting for Chu Xun to arrive. The young woman sighs deeply and regrets forgetting to ask for her colleague's phone number or social media to facilitate the meeting. She sits on the bench and begins to worry because she knows nothing about the grade level, academic performance, or the subjects the mysterious student needs to reinforce. To make matters worse, the girl's stomach starts growling loudly with hunger, but she swears she needs to hold on to keep that tutoring job. Suddenly, a shrill cry calling for her cousin echoes from across the street, instantly catching Su Muqing's attention. She watches from afar and notices that her classmate has just arrived at the location by taxi, accompanied by a girl who is pulling him by the arm. Chu Xun walks briskly, while his cousin continues to hold his hand quite intimately in the middle of the sidewalk. Su Muqing observes the scene curiously and wonders who that girl might be, lamenting that they are too far away to hear the conversation. In reality, Chu Lan is just begging her cousin to help her make up an excuse for her mother so she can go to an anime store in the afternoon. The girl strikes a cute pose with her hands together and begins to flatter her cousin with all sorts of saccharine compliments in an attempt to convince him. She gives him a pleading, bright look, insisting he accept the favor, leaving Chu Xun somewhat embarrassed by all the flattery. With a conspiratorial and mysterious smile on his face, the young man says he might consider the matter if she agrees to help him with an important task today. He pulls out his cell phone, pretending to call his aunt to enroll her in extra weekend classes, causing the girl to panic and beg for explanations. The young man firmly grasps her shoulder and tells her to come closer to hear the confidential instructions of the plan. Chu Xun leans in and whispers in her cousin's ear about how she should behave as soon as Su Muqing arrives for the tutoring session. Hidden behind a nearby wall, Su Muqing's eyes widened in utter shock at seeing the two so close together. From where she's observing, their approach looks like an extremely intimate and affectionate embrace in the middle of the street. The girl turns as red as a pepper and despairs when she wrongly assumes that Chu Xun already has a girlfriend. She panics, thinking she shouldn't interrupt the couple, and starts to sneak back away so as not to disturb their romantic moment. Still spying from afar, she is surprised to realize that the bespectacled guy who seemed so focused on his studies actually knows how to flirt. Oblivious to the misunderstanding, Chu Lan grins mischievously upon hearing the plan and confidently announces that she understands the mission perfectly. The boy is confused by her response, but his cousin pats him on the chest, assuring him that he can leave the whole situation in her hands. She strikes a heroic pose and vows to go above and beyond to ensure the success of her cousin's plan, leaving Chu Xun quite apprehensive with so much excitement. Seeing the exaggerated confidence in his cousin's eyes, the young man confesses to himself that he feels even less secure than before. The young man's mind warns him that the greatest danger is not when an incompetent ally fails in the mission, but rather when he decides to have his own ideas along the way. Suddenly, a furious scream echoes, calling his name, making Chu Xun sense an overwhelming murderous intent coming from behind. A figure leaps into the air with all its might and delivers a flying kick toward the boy in the middle of the sidewalk. However, the attacker misses the blow in a ridiculous way and ends up falling flat on the cold ground, leaving his cousins on alert with that bizarre fall. Chu Xun adjusts his glasses and angrily asks what his colleague Fang Yuan thinks he's doing in the middle of the street with that surprise attack. Dramatically crying, Fang Yuan points an accusing finger and complains upon seeing his friend accompanied by a pretty girl, reminding him of their old pact of eternal bachelorhood. He starts shaking his colleague, complaining that they should support each other in their single lives, but Chu Xun coldly pushes him away, reminding him that they aren't even that close. At that moment, Chu Lan points to the newcomer with a mocking smile and asks if that boy is the famous perverted friend his cousin talked so much about. Fang Yuan stopped crying instantly and turned around, intrigued by the girl's voice, trying to understand who that person was beside his friend. Fang Yuan is shocked to see how much Chu Xun's cousin, whom he affectionately called Little Mariko, has grown since the last time he saw her. Chulan responds mockingly that it's called puberty and takes the opportunity to tease the boy about his height, leaving him quite irritated by the comment. Fang Yuan hugs his friend, relieved that he didn't betray the bachelor's pact, while Chu Shun robotically denies any involvement with secret organizations. Looking at her cell phone, the girl hurriedly says goodbye, explaining that she needs to run so she won't be late for her sports team's practice. As her cousin runs towards school, Fang Yuan waves excitedly, wishing her a good workout, and sighs, commenting on how incredibly cute she looks. The chubby boy nudges Chu Shun's shoulder with a conspiratorial look, suggesting that his friend should take advantage of the opportunity with his cousin now that she's grown up. But his smile instantly vanishes when he realizes that Chu Shun is staring at him with a frighteningly cold and dark look. The young man pulls out a huge book on criminal law and sternly warns that any inappropriate thoughts regarding the minor will result in severe legal penalties. Fang Yuan runs after him, startled, and asks why his cousin is at school, with the boy explaining that her team will be using the court for a friendly match today. Meanwhile, in the classroom, Su Muqing tries to focus on her studies, but her mind keeps hammering away at the painful question of whether Chu Shun really has a girlfriend. The girl blushes deeply as she recalls the scene at the bus stop, convinced that the two were about to share a real kiss in the middle of the road. However, she remembers Chu Shun's bizarre obsession with mathematics and finds it almost impossible that someone so cold and focused on books would have time for a relationship. Shaking her head in confusion, the young woman insists to herself that there must be some logical explanation behind this whole suspicious situation. She analyzes the facts and remembers that Fang Yuan also seemed to know the girl very well, deducing that she might just be a childhood acquaintance of the two boys. Su Muqing calms down at the thought that it's just an old friend, while Chu Shun suddenly turns around when she feels her focused gaze on her. Later, as the midday break begins, the boy deeply regrets having to waste 2 valuable hours of study on a useless activity like resting. He arranges his materials on the table, grumbling about the wasted time that school rules impose on dedicated students. However, the young man quickly opens his backpack and takes out 2 well-prepared lunchboxes, seeing this as the perfect opportunity to put a new plan into action. At that moment, Fang Yuan bursts into the room, shouting for his friend and desperately announcing that he needs to tell her an extremely urgent secret. Chu Shun stares at him with boredom, asking what he wants this time, while the chubby boy notices the colorful lunchboxes his friend is holding. Fang Yuan asks him to forget about the food for a second and pay absolute attention to his words, assuring him that the matter is one of life or death. He confesses with a dramatic look that he had a very daring idea, and Chu Shun quickly cuts him off, reminding him that the country has strict criminal laws for any kind of madness. The boy complains indignantly, saying that his friend never wants to hear him speak seriously, forcing the bespectacled boy to give him permission to continue his speech. With flushed cheeks, Fang Yuan reveals his conviction that Su Muqing is in love with him, causing Chu Shun to choke and spit out all the water in shock. He tries to prove his theory by stating that the girl hasn't stopped giving him mysterious and discreet glances ever since they arrived at school earlier today. The chubby boy celebrates his supposed romantic victory, while Chu Shun smiles mockingly, saying that the chance of him being an alien is greater than that fantasy suggests. Fang Yuan begins to feign concern about having already shown interest in another girl the previous week, lamenting the drama of having so many suitors all at once. Chu Shun mocks his friend's supposed charm in his thoughts, while his colleague imagines absurd scenarios of being served by several girls dressed as maids. The boy dramatically kneels, begging for advice and questioning why his teenage romantic life is always so complicated and full of dilemmas. The bespectacled boy simply sighs, finding the situation amusing, and concludes that his friend is suffering from the classic teenage delusions of romantic infatuation. Even though he thinks it's all nonsense, Chu Shun mysteriously reveals that there's an extremely simple way to solve that problem once and for all. He suggests with a sadistic look and a wicked smile that his friend show the girls his internet browser search history, guaranteeing that they will disappear instantly. Fang Yuan is horrified by the malicious suggestion and points the finger, accusing his friend of being a truly evil and unscrupulous creature. Chu Shun ignores the drama and asks to borrow his friend's ID for a card game, further enraging his friend who feels like the target of constant jokes. The boy mockingly recalls when his classmate swore that his collectible anime figurine had failed him, and Fang Yuan shouts in despair, insisting that it was true. Determined not to waste any more time on those paranoid thoughts, Chushun coldly bids him farewell and leaves the classroom with his lunchboxes, amidst furious protests from his friend. Meanwhile, the image of Chushun walking hand in hand with her cousin is constantly stuck in Su Muqing's head. Sitting alone on the school steps, the young woman hugs her empty lunchbox and wonders if it wouldn't be much better and simpler to ask her classmate the truth directly. Her mind enters a funny conflict between respecting his privacy or acting like a regular friend who's just curious about her partner's personal life. Suddenly, Chu Shun's mysterious voice echoes from right behind her, asking what she would like to question, causing the girl to gasp in fright at the unexpected appearance. Startled by the sudden approach, Su Muqing loses her balance and slips on the steps, sending her lunchbox flying through the air. The food container falls to the floor, opening completely and scattering all of the girl's noodles across the stairs, leaving her distraught at the loss of her only food. With her eyes rolling back in despair and hunger, she quickly bends down to try and pick up the food from the ground, appealing to the famous mystical 5-second rule. But before she can touch the dirty food, Chu Shun's firm hand grabs her wrist to stop her from doing that crazy thing. Su Muqing froze instantly, looking up in surprise and staring closely at the young man's serious and worried face. The young man firmly assures her that she doesn't need to stoop to eating something off the floor and gently pulls the girl away from the dirt. He holds out the pink lunchbox filled with rice, golden shrimp, and a succulent chicken thigh, making the girl's eyes light up at the unexpected feast. Su Muqing shyly asks if she can really accept that wonderful food, and he confirms, saying that the lunch was actually prepared especially for her. The girl's heart races, and she blushes intensely when she realizes that he went to the trouble of cooking, focusing exclusively on her. Chu Shun calmly explained that he remembered the financial difficulties she had reported the previous day, and figured she would probably go hungry during the break. Su Muqing savors her meal with flushed cheeks, torn between happiness at the kind gesture and doubt as to whether he is truly in a relationship with another girl. She asks how he guessed her whereabouts, and the boy calmly explains that he had been watching her from afar in that spot whenever she went upstairs to put away her supplies. The girl is paralyzed when she discovers he was secretly watching her, wondering if it's right to accept all that attention when he already has a girlfriend. Thinking it would be much better to keep a little distance, she shyly steps aside and thanks her colleague for lunch. Chu Shun notices the sudden distancing and questions her about why she's moving away from him like that in the middle of the stairs. The young man approaches her intensely and asks directly if she's not enjoying the food or if she would like help with the cutlery. Su Muqing panics completely and blushes when she hears her colleague suggest feeding her, not understanding why he's acting so boldly today. She wonders if he noticed her discreet glances of admiration during class and completely misinterpreted the whole situation. The young woman imagines him acting like a true charmer and is frightened by the possibility that her studious classmate has transformed into a tremendous womanizer. Suddenly, her eyes widen as she realizes that this course of events seems very familiar to something she already knows from another place. She vaguely remembers witnessing her classmates watching a super cliché romantic mini-drama on a mobile app. In her fertile imagination, she envisions Chu Shun as a wealthy young master from a traditional family, and the girl at the bus stop as his betrothed by contract. She envisions the boy dramatically pinning her against the wall and demanding she sign a fake relationship agreement just to scare away other potential girlfriends. Su Muqing despairs at the thought that her life has turned into a cliché drama of contract dating or a soap opera-style romantic substitution. She imagines her supposed rival bursting into the place in tears, accusing her of stealing her man, under Chu Shun's indifferent and cold gaze. The girl trembles with fear at the thought of being dragged into a chaotic love triangle full of dramatic fights because of her classmate. She covers her face with her hands, completely embarrassed at feeling like the suffering protagonist of an internet romance novel. Chu Shun breaks her trance by explaining that she simply overcooked and brought the extra lunchbox because she remembered that she had fainted from lack of sugar last week. The girl timidly agrees, internally grumbling about the boy's lack of sensitivity in exposing her poverty so directly. Still, her heart warms when she sees his genuine concern, and she scolds herself for having created so many absurd theories and paranoid thoughts in her mind. The young man continues eating and confesses that if she were to faint during the test, he would finally be able to inherit first place, leaving his classmate indignant at his honesty. but he quickly adjusts his glasses proudly and declares that a true warrior must defeat his opponents cleanly and fairly without wishing for the failure of others. He mentally assures himself that he never resorted to superstitions or wished she would become stupid on her birthdays in order to win the grading contest. Su Muqing senses his thoughts and smiles ironically, absolutely certain that he had truly considered all those wicked things before changing his mind. Still, the young woman finds the boy's sense of justice amusing and thinks the mental nickname he gave himself is quite cute and funny. She eats happily and jokes that, since he cares so much, she will make sure to stay strong and healthy to continue defending first place forever. Chushun accepts the provocation with a confident smile, wishing her opponent a long life, while the latter playfully thanks her for the blessing. Next, the girl takes a huge bite of the chicken thigh prepared by her classmate to try the special seasoning. Her eyes shine brightly and she freezes instantly as she feels the incredible explosion of flavors in her mouth. Su Muqing travels to a world of sweets and fantasies with the wonderful taste of meat, crying tears of emotion because she hasn't eaten such a good meal in a long time. She begins to devour the food in a desperate and happy manner, leaving Chu Shun quite startled by her colleague's exaggerated reaction. The young man decides to change the subject and pulls out his cell phone to show the basic information about his troubled cousin, whom she will begin tutoring tonight. Su Muqing looks at the profile of the girl named Chu Lan and is impressed to read that she is a prominent athlete and winner of badminton tournaments in the region. But his jaw drops in complete shock when he sees that the girl's overall score is only 67 points on an exam worth over 600 points. The girl asks suspiciously if the girl is really from his family, making Chushin grumble in annoyance at the mockery. She jokes that she had prepared a study plan focused on elementary school, but now she'll need to retrieve her preschool books to help her. The boy asks if tonight's trial lesson is still on, and Su Muqing kindly assures him that the challenge won't be a problem for her. She suspects the wonderful lunch was just a preemptive bribery tactic to keep her from giving up the position, while Chushun fears she might change her mind. Determined to close the deal before she backs out, the young man tries to speed up the conversation but is abruptly interrupted by his colleague. Su Muqing delicately placed her finger on Chushun's lips in a sudden gesture, leaving him completely paralyzed and blushing with shock. The boy stammered, confused, not understanding why she was so close and interrupting him in the middle of the staircase, her face flushed with nervousness. The young woman immediately asks for silence and discreetly points towards the lower floor. She whispers desperately, revealing that the dreaded Professor Wang is climbing the stairs down the hallway at that very moment. Chu Shun thinks there's no problem with them being seen there, but Su Muqing, annoyed by his lack of awareness of the danger, tugs at him. The young woman explains that the teacher is obsessed with romance novels and that if she caught them alone there sharing the same food, she would develop paranoid thoughts that would ruin their reputations. She notices the footsteps getting closer and becomes desperate when she realizes the teacher is about to turn the corner onto the stairs. Without thinking twice, Su Muqing grabs Chushun's hand tightly and drags him frantically down the corridor to escape once and for all. The boy points to an empty file room at the end of the corridor, suggesting they hide in the quiet spot until the teacher leaves. Professor Wang walks down the hallway and stops, intrigued, right in front of the door to the school's archive room. She calls the person in charge and suspiciously questions why the door to the file room is locked from the inside, finding the suspicious silence coming from there odd. Su Muqing is thrown into utter despair inside the archives room when she hears Professor Wang announcing on her cell phone that she will be entering the same room to retrieve some papers. The girl covers her mouth in terror, imagining that her parents will be called, her scholarship will be canceled, and her entire academic life will be ruined. Chushun merely observes the despair and uncontrollable trembling of her classmate in the face of the impending discovery. The young man firmly grasps her hand and confidently announces that he has just devised a strategic plan to save them from that situation. Outside, Professor Wang approaches the door, suspicious that some young couple might be using the empty room as a secret meeting place. She adjusts her glasses with a manic look, sensing that the air in that hallway is suspiciously romantic and sweet today. The woman flung open the door at once, shouting that she knows there are students hiding inside and demands that they come out. She looks around the silent environment, but is confused to notice that the place seems completely deserted. While the two hide under a table, the teacher begins to aggressively count them down, threatening severe punishment if she has to look for them. The tension mounts with each passing second as the woman continues the countdown, slowly approaching the hiding place. At this critical moment, Chushun begins to make a funny and desperate expression, feeling that he will not be able to contain his physical reaction. Su Muqing notices his colleague's flushed face and panics completely upon realizing the imminent danger. She realizes he's about to let out a loud sneeze that will instantly reveal their hiding place to the teacher. Without thinking twice, the girl desperately rushes towards the boy to try and prevent the disaster. She throws herself on top of him and forcefully covers Chushun's mouth, mentally begging him not to make a sound. The two lie there in an extremely close and romantic position, their hearts racing with nervousness. The boy's eyes widened, completely flushed, as he felt the gentle, sudden touch of his classmate's hand covering his face. Su Muqing feels his warm breath against her palm and is extremely embarrassed by this unexpected physical intimacy. Professor Wang remained standing in the middle of the file room, puzzled by the absolute silence and the lack of response to her warning. She wonders if she was really mistaken about the presence of students there, since no one showed up after her countdown ended. The woman decides to turn around and leave, while the two young people remain paralyzed under the table on high alert. Suddenly, Chushun pokes Su Muqing's cheek with his finger, infuriating the girl because he's making jokes at such a dangerous moment. The young man showed her the screen of his cell phone, explaining that he was only yawning and that the real danger there was her noisy heartbeat, which was registering more than 100 decibels. Su Muqing is furious in her thoughts at the boy's lack of nerves and wonders how he can possibly fall asleep in such a dangerous situation. She tries to hide her embarrassment by assuring everyone that her heart isn't beating that fast, while her colleague smirks at his phone. With a mischievous look, Chushun quickly types a message and silently sends it from his device. Suddenly, Professor Wang's phone starts ringing loudly in the middle of the silent room, startling the woman. She answers the call quickly and is shocked to hear the urgent news the caller is delivering on the other end of the line. The official reports that student Fang Yuan is having dramatic outbursts in the courtyard and shouting about being reincarnated in another world after being hit by a truck. Desperate because of the commotion, the teacher runs out of the file room to restrain the student, saving the young people from the danger of being discovered. Chushun reveals that he texted his friend to create that distraction, and Su Muqing asks worriedly about what the generous reward he had promised his colleague would be. The boy gives her a frightening look, asking if she really wants to know, causing the girl to immediately drop the question out of sheer terror. He questions why they ran away in the first place, and Su Muqing shouts, red with anger, that their attitude would surely lead to misunderstandings. The girl hides her flushed face between her knees, embarrassed by the possibility that people might draw the wrong conclusions about them. She explains that seeing a boy and a girl alone eating the same food in an empty room would make anyone think nonsense, while Chushun suggests absurd academic theories. Su Muqing sighs, thinking that his naivete is almost a blessing of peace, but insists on asking what normal people would think of that scene. With her face completely red, she confesses that obviously everyone would think the two of them were on a real romantic date. She stammers, assuring him that their relationship is completely innocent and that they were just talking, and Chushun timidly agrees with her logical explanation. The boy thinks the teachers would understand the truth if they explained it, but his classmate laments, saying that debunking romantic rumors at school is never a simple task. To make matters worse, she recalls with horror seeing Professor Wang look in her direction when they were still on the staircase. Su Muqing suddenly becomes desperate in the room as she realizes the terrible consequences of that possible discovery. The girl's soul almost leaves her body at the thought that the teacher already knows it was the two of them hiding on the building's staircase. In the afternoon, regular classes continue at the school with the teacher demonstrating advanced mathematical equations on the blackboard. Chushun pays absolute attention to the university material being presented, noting every detail with extreme focus and determination. Su Muqing observes her colleague from afar and is indignant to notice that he is completely calm, while she continues to suffer alone with the paranoia from lunch. Amid her panicked daydreams, she imagines the tragic scene of being called by the teacher in the middle of class in front of all her classmates. In her mental nightmare, she sees herself stammering before an enraged Wang Lihong, demanding explanations about their secret meeting on the stairs. The imaginary teacher points her finger, accusing her of dating, and announces her immediate suspension and the loss of her scholarship as punishment. The girl lays her head on the table, crying desperately, silently begging that this terrible fantasy not come true and trying to focus on today's private lesson. However, reality sets in when the math teacher interrupts the actual lesson and calls Su Muqing aside for a serious talk in the hallway. Upon reaching the principal's office hallway, Su Muqing realizes that the principal himself is also present and despairs upon realizing that she will have no way to escape her tragic fate. The director seriously informs her that they are already aware of her current situation and have decided to call her in only to confirm some important details. The girl turns completely red with embarrassment, desperately wondering if the school's hidden security cameras have filmed their hiding place in the file room. Professor Wang places her hand on her shoulder and explains in a calm tone that the school never ignores the difficulties and problems faced by its best students. Su Muqing completely panics after misinterpreting the words, convinced that the school has launched a strict investigation to punish early dating. Shaken by the situation, the young woman tries to stammer out a flimsy excuse, swearing that the whole scene on the building's staircase was nothing more than a big misunderstanding. The principal crosses his arms, stating that the decision has already been made by the board, and the girl despairs, believing she has been condemned without a chance to defend her classmate Chu Shun. Su Muqing begs for a chance to explain the facts and voluntarily takes all the blame, desperately trying to save the bespectacled boy from any punishment. However, the teacher interrupts her, saying that she already knows about her deliberate habit of eating only plain, nutrient-free pasta every day. The woman hands over a cafeteria card with a monthly financial aid bonus, explaining that she spoke with the classroom teacher and decided to help her so she can eat well. She timidly confesses that she noticed the girl going up to the rooftop to eat such meager meals, warning that a young girl in her growth phase needs to eat healthily. Deeply moved and with tears in her eyes, Su Muqing thanks the teacher, realizing that she had misjudged the woman's strict temperament. However, the girl is brought back to reality by a bizarre detail she had forgotten to clarify with the teacher. With a serious and menacing look, Professor Wang demands to know the real reason why she and Chu Shun are sharing the same lunchbox on the 5th floor of the school. Su Muqing is utterly desperate when she sees that the subject of the alleged affair has resurfaced with full force at the board meeting. She tries to devise a quick way out and recalls with relief Chu Shun's competitive tone when he challenged her to a rematch of grades the previous day. The girl assures the principal that the boy was merely issuing a study challenge to her, which makes the principal laugh and agree that such behavior is typical of him. Satisfied with the logical explanation, the teacher allows her to return to class on the condition that she starts using the food voucher card regularly. Su Muqing looks at the cafeteria card in her hands with a mixture of gratitude and strong determination in her heart. She bows respectfully in gratitude for the help offered and dashes back to the classroom before the end of recess. The young woman bids a friendly farewell to the two educators, leaving Professor Wang thoughtful and silent in her office. The principal remarks that providing assistance should be his responsibility and jokes that the teacher spends her entire salary sponsoring needy students. But she insists that her priority is ensuring no one goes hungry. He questions whether she isn't afraid that the two excellent students are secretly dating, and the woman immediately dismisses the idea due to the focused profile of the boy with glasses. They jokingly agree that Chu Shun is a veritable walking study machine who only has eyes for books and math formulas. After classes end, Chu Shun tidies up her things in the classroom and calls out to her classmate before she leaves the school. Su Muqing turns to him and shyly confesses that the boy was absolutely right in his earlier words. The boy smiles smugly as he agrees that he is always right in his logical deductions and praises his classmates' evolving thinking. The young woman explains that she was referring to the kind hearts of the school's teachers, and he agrees somewhat confusedly, not understanding why she brought up the subject out of the blue. Suddenly, her cheeks flushed, she firmly grasped his hands and sweetly called out to him in the middle of the empty classroom. With a bright and moved look in her eyes, Su Muqing reveals that his presence by her side was what gave her the courage she so desperately needed to make a difficult decision. The bespectacled boy is speechless when he sees her loving gaze fixed on him and wonders why she's acting that way again. The young woman apologizes and quickly retrieves the cafeteria card she had received from Teacher Wang. She runs out of the classroom saying she needs to take care of an urgent matter before leaving the boy shouting, completely bewildered by her behavior. On the school terrace, Teacher Wang takes advantage of the late afternoon breeze to inspect the courtyard from a privileged vantage point atop the building. The woman scans the field, looking for rebellious couples who are secretly dating after the school bell rings. She is startled to hear Su Muqing's breathless voice calling her name right behind her in the open terrace area. The girl runs up to her and hands back the cafeteria card, asking permission to return the financial aid offered. The teacher suggests that she accept the money as a friendly loan if she is embarrassed, but the young woman immediately and politely refuses. With a bright, sweet smile, the girl reveals that another very special person has already volunteered to help her, and that she now has the means to solve her problems on her own. Upon returning the card to the educator, she confesses that she would have accepted the aid the previous day, but that her financial situation has now changed definitively. She smiles, touched, and explains that her mother always taught her never to bother others unnecessarily, asking her to pass the card on to a student who needs it more. The teacher is surprised by the nobility of her gesture and questions whether this mysterious person helping the girl is truly trustworthy. Sumuching flashes a sweet smile and winks at her, assuring her with complete conviction that her protector is someone as trustworthy and special as the teacher herself. Outside the school, the young woman spots Chu Shun leaning against the wall of the exit corridor and curiously asks if he isn't going to leave soon. The young man crossed his arms, feigning coldness, as he proudly replied that he was merely waiting for an important person to arrive. The girl runs up to him with her backpack on her back and innocently asks if he was waiting for his friend Fang Yuan to arrive. He stares intently at her and explains that he was waiting for the irresponsible person who fled the room right in the middle of an important conversation between the two of them. The young woman clasps her hands together, offering sincere apologies for her sudden departure, while the young man mockingly complains that she made him waste exactly 36 minutes and 40 seconds of studying. Chu Shun turned his face, completely red, feigning indifference as he assured her that he didn't care in the slightest, making the girl laugh at her bespectacled classmate's obvious lie. As they walk together under the beautiful sunset, the two continue to playfully tease each other about who is acting wrongly in that newfound friendship. Su Muqing mocks his language error, commenting that despite being excellent at everything, his Chinese is quite mediocre, leaving the young man quite indignant at the criticism. Chu Shun tries to defend her knowledge of literature with a complex speech, but her colleague apologizes, laughing, and says that she's the one who doesn't understand the subject. The girl decides to change the subject and asks what that extremely important issue was that he had been waiting so long to discuss with her. The boy with glasses begins to stutter awkwardly, his cheeks flushing, leaving Su Muqing confused by her classmate's sudden shyness. He confesses, embarrassed, that he doesn't have her contact information and that he felt too awkward to ask, remembering his friend Fang Yuan's advice about how nerve-wracking this situation can be. Su Muqing smiles in relief, explaining that she hardly uses the internet because she has a basic cell phone plan and suggests giving him her phone number directly. Chu Shun jots down the contact information enthusiastically and suddenly asks if she prefers boiled or grilled fish, leaving the young woman completely confused by the sudden culinary question. She blushes deeply and wonders if the young man is planning to cook and bring her a new lunchbox the next day. The young man reveals that his mother asked him to find out her preferences in order to prepare dinner, leaving Su Muqing panicked by the sudden invitation to eat at his house. Chu Shun tries to calm her down by explaining that dinner will be at his cousin Chu Lan's house, but ends up making the situation worse by listing that his entire family will be gathered there. The girl is utterly desperate when she realizes that instead of a simple tutoring session, she's about to meet her classmates' entire family all at once. Su Muqing froze in her tracks, trembling with nervousness at the prospect of such a daunting family commitment. She suggests going back home to get ready before leaving, but the young man insists they go together right away, seeing no need for her to return to the apartment. The young woman feels very awkward and shyly confesses that she needs to take a shower and change clothes because she is sweaty after her afternoon physical education class. Chu Shun starts sniffing her closely while giving a bizarre scientific explanation about odors, concluding with all the sincerity in the world that she smells very good. Su Muqing pushes him away, blushing with embarrassment, and shouts, calling the boy a fool, while he defends himself, claiming that calling the second-best student in the class a donkey is pure slander. The girl runs off home to change her clothes, while the boy shouts the dinner time, warning her not to be late. She yells back, assuring him that she already knows the time, running down the street completely flushed at her bespectacled colleague's lack of awareness. Chu Shun calmly watches her escape and decides she can now return home to prepare for family dinner. However, when he opens the family group chat on his cell phone, he discovers that his parents have locked him out of the house and are demanding that he wait for his friend at the condominium gate. Shortly after, Su Mu-ching arrives at the location wearing a beautiful white dress, leaving Chu-shun completely dazzled and speechless by her beauty. The boy disguises his embarrassment by looking away and suggests that they walk together towards the building where his cousin lives. He decides to hide the humiliation of being locked out of the house by his parents, but ends up staring at the girl in a very intense and silent way. Su Mu-ching becomes very shy under his focused gaze and asks insecurely if the clothes she chose look strange or ugly. The young man coldly replies that her look is quite ordinary and commonplace, comparing the dress to something totally normal to see on the street. The girl becomes extremely irritated in her thoughts when she realizes that he didn't need to repeat the common word so many times to describe her appearance. She walks sullenly beside him, upset at receiving such a lame compliment after having put so much effort into getting ready for dinner. But Chu-shun quickly adds that the change in her appearance is something quite innovative and surprising to him. He compares the surprise to an old romantic legend in which a boy discovers that his best classmate is actually a beautiful girl, leaving Su Mu-ching angry. The bespectacled young man reflects that Su Mu-ching is completely different from all the other girls at school he has ever met. The girl's face burned with embarrassment as she wondered if that difference from the boy held some hidden romantic significance. Chu-shun mentally confirms that her colleague truly occupies a completely unique and different space in her thoughts. In his focused mind, he considers all the other girls mere unimportant extras who waste their time gossiping instead of dedicating themselves to their studies. For him, Su Mu-ching is the only insurmountable mountain he needs to overcome at all costs, proudly labeling her as his eternal rival throughout his academic life. Su Mu-ching senses all that senseless, competitive madness through her telepathy and is utterly horrified by the boy's deranged mind. The girl begins to tremble with indignation in the middle of the road, drawing the attention of Chu-shun, who asks, confused, what is wrong with her? Su Mu-ching bows excessively and offers a sincere apology, firmly suggesting that the two of them remain focused solely on their studies. She adds that they will be able to talk better about other subjects once they pass the college entrance exam and enter the same university in the future. The bespectacled boy interprets the comment as a challenge to her superiority and despairs at the thought of his rival trampling on his academic pride. Even in college, the girl is completely stunned when she catches his thoughts about kneeling and licking her shoes in a submissive manner if he loses the grading contest. Chu-shun calls out to her seriously in the middle of the street, causing the young woman to respond with an immediate warning to snap out of her colleague's mental trance. With a deep gaze under the sunset, the young man with glasses solemnly declares that time will take care of proving everything. Su Mu-ching blushes intensely as she interprets that he will use the time to prove his sincere love, unable to forget the rumor that he already has a girlfriend. The young man interrupts her paranoia by stopping in front of a wooden door and announcing that they have finally arrived at the dinner location. The girl bites her lip nervously, praying inwardly that she can survive this encounter with her classmate's family. Chu-shun gripped the doorknob firmly and opened the silent apartment door once and for all. Upon entering, they are greeted by all their family members dressed in dazzling formal attire and with radiant, welcoming smiles. Chu-shun is horrified by that bizarre display of ostentation and quickly slams the door in their faces to recover from the shock. The boy takes a deep breath, seeing Su Mu-ching's confused look, and decides to turn the doorknob to try and open the door normally again. Upon opening the door again, the family members maintain the same impeccable festive pose and warmly invite them to come right into the apartment. Su Mu-ching tries to greet Chu-shun's uncles politely, but her nervousness is so overwhelming that her mind goes completely blank. Meanwhile, the bespectacled boy tries to break free from the tight embrace of his father and uncle, not understanding the reason for so much posing and sudden celebration. The women in the family surround the young woman, showering her with compliments and revealing that the young man is always talking about her, even whispering her name in his dreams. In the midst of that awkward moment, an excited voice calling for her brother suddenly echoes from the hallway, startling Su Mu-ching. It is the boy's cousin, Chu-lan, who bursts into the dining room, yelling angrily because he didn't wait for her at the school gate as they had arranged. Upon noticing the presence of another person there, the black-haired girl immediately stops complaining and stares at Su Mu-ching with considerable surprise. Chu-shun takes the opportunity to adjust her glasses seriously and formally introduces her cousin as the new student who will receive tutoring lessons. Su Muqing is stunned when she connects the dots and realizes that the supposed girlfriend she so feared is actually just his cousin. The young woman feels her face burning with shame as she recalls all the paranoid and absurd romantic theories she unnecessarily created in her mind. Even though she doesn't consider herself a shy person, she's completely at a loss for where to hide her face from sheer embarrassment during dinner. With that, everyone gathers around a gigantic table overflowing with delicious dishes prepared especially for the occasion. Chushun's mother begins filling the guest's plate with generous pieces of meat, insisting that she eat plenty without ceremony. She and her aunt continue to pamper the young girl and comment that she is too thin, assuring her that girls her age need to eat well to grow up healthy. Su Muqing appreciates the immense hospitality, but begins to wonder if they will still be able to have today's private lesson with so much food. The bespectacled boy tries to intervene, warning that so much fat could end up harming his colleague's health, receiving confused looks from his cousin, who just wants to eat. The women give him a good scolding for being so insensitive and ask the young woman to ignore his annoying comments and enjoy her lettuce salad. Despite all the commotion and loud chatter at the table, Su Muqing smiles sweetly, finding the familiar atmosphere very welcoming and comforting. Suddenly, the boy's father and uncle cast extremely serious and intimidating glances in her direction, asking about her profession and family background. But the tension vanishes in the blink of an eye when they discover they're from the same hometown, bursting into laughter and celebrating the happy coincidence. The young woman gazes at her colleague affectionately, admiring the beautiful unity of that family, leaving the young man blushing and confused as to why she is looking at him like that. However, the biggest surprise of the entire night was yet to come for the model student. The girl she previously thought was Chu Shun's girlfriend, and who seemed to be a complete lost cause when it came to her studies, being described by the boy himself as a black hole of knowledge capable of repelling any kind of intelligence around it. She was now sitting intently at her desk right after dinner had ended. Chulan was focused on solving the questions from the leveling test that Su Muqing had brought to evaluate her performance. Finding that change in behavior too suspicious, the young woman decides to use her telepathy to read what's going on in her colleague's cousin's mind. To her surprise, Chulan's mind is tuned into a super scary horror audiobook about a ghost girl chewing on something in an elevator. The cousin begins to sweat with terror at the frightening narration from the headphones, trembling with curiosity to know what the creature was eating. Su Muqing suddenly appears right behind her and whispers macabrely that the ghost was chewing on the ears of female students who refused to study. The fright is so great that the girl lets out a desperate scream, raising her arms, and swears she wasn't listening to internet romance novels during the lesson. The tutor points to the wires hidden in the coat sleeve and comments mockingly that that trick of hiding headphones is quite old and well known. Chulan tries to play it cool, saying the questions were too easy and that she just wanted to enrich her mind, but Su Muqing demands the immediate delivery of the device. The cousin pouts in pure frustration at being exposed, but the young tutor simply stares at her with a firm, authoritative smile. Ignoring the girl's dramatic cries on the floor, Su Muqing begins confiscating all the video games and cell phones from the room and placing them in an organizer box. Chulan tearfully asks what she should call her from now on, secretly thinking that it would be strange to call her sister-in-law before her brother manages to win her over. The cousin mentally reflects that she needs to assess the tutor's qualities before accepting her into the family, leaving Su Muqing blushing deeply as she catches the gossip. Uncomfortable with the girl's thoughts, the young woman stammers and asks to be called only by her own name, but her cousin refuses, saying that would be impolite. At that moment, Chulan hugs her colleague tightly and asks, with a radiant smile, if she can affectionately call her older sister. She sweetly argues that being classmates with her cousin makes her part of the family too, leaving Su Muqing surprised by so much affection. The young woman accepts the nickname with a laugh and says that since it's getting late, they can leave the rest of the tasks for the next day so she can assess their study background. Su Muqing suggests that it's time for her to leave since it was just a trial lesson, which leaves her cousin in a state of shock and absolute panic. Chulan desperately holds her hand and begs her to do the exercises right away, secretly thinking that he needs to keep the girl there to help his cousin with his romance. An hour later, after much insistence, the bedroom door finally begins to open slowly and silently. Chu Shun peeks into the room and finds Su Muqing waving cheerfully at him, while his cousin continues writing intently at her desk. The bespectacled boy is completely shocked by the scene and suspiciously asks who that studious girl is who took his cousin's place. He absurdly suggests that his cousin must have committed a serious crime and that her colleague is using this as blackmail to force her to study, irritating both of them. Chulan finally loses his temper, jumps up from his chair yelling and lunges at his cousin, accusing him of being a real villain and a troublemaker. The girl throws herself on top of him on the bed, complaining about having suffered studying for an entire hour, and points her finger, stating that it's all his fault. She recalls irritably that it was her own cousin who had whispered in her ear earlier, telling her to act that way towards her new tutor. Chushun's eyes widened in complete shock as he finally remembered the secret plan he had devised for this afternoon. Su Muqing kindly explains that he will take the test home to correct it, since the exam is only meant to assess his colleague's cousin's academic weaknesses. The young woman decides to end her work and promises to return the next day, but two silhouettes with terrifying, glowing eyes appear right behind her in the dark room. Chulan dramatically grabbed her tutor's shoulder in the middle of the silent room, making the girl jump in fright at the approach. The boy's cousin reminds him that there's still an hour until his friend's curfew, pleading with a sweet smile for her to extend her visit a little longer. The little girl gives a bright, pleading look, suggesting they stay and have fun together, leaving Su Muqing surprised by the unexpected proposal to play video games. She complains about how difficult it is to find company to play games, while the young woman notices that Chu Shun is closing her bedroom door silently and suspiciously. With a serious look worthy of an anime villain, the bespectacled boy adjusts his face and mentally assures himself that the decisive moment of the night has finally begun. He angrily recalls when the two used to argue intensely about games in the past, building a huge rivalry that he didn't intend to lose today. Oblivious to the competitive atmosphere, Su Muqing says she would accept the invitation, but sweetly considers that her classmate probably doesn't have any free time. However, the system screen glows brightly before Chu Shun's eyes, showing that the time to complete the mission, hand in hand, is running out quickly. To the young woman's surprise, the boy pushes his glasses aside with a confident little smile and assures her that he has plenty of time to have fun with them. Su Muqing tries to logically remind him that it's just a silly game that won't provide any practical knowledge, but the boy insists on continuing. He approaches with a romantic aura of flowers and speaks about how family moments are also important, making his colleague doubt if he truly believes that. Then, the boy's cousin turns off the main lights in the room and lights a single mysterious candle to create a tense atmosphere. Chulan flashes a mischievous and frightening grin, theatrically announcing that the long-awaited spirit summoning game is finally about to begin. The girl prepares a board game and begins reciting verses to summon the pencil entity, while Su Muqing nervously asks if they can't play something else. The young woman stammers that, despite being rational and focused on science, this type of supernatural game terrifies her and gives her the creeps. The little girl tries to reassure her tutor, guaranteeing that she has already performed that invocation dozens of times and that nothing out of the ordinary has ever happened in the house. But the cousin quickly spoils the mood by saying that she sometimes feels touches on her feet in bed and that the closet doors open by themselves, terrifying her friend. Chu Shun throws a bucket of cold water on her by scientifically explaining that the cabinet is simply broken and that the family's pet cat is the one sleeping at her feet. Su Muqing sighs in relief upon discovering the truth about the cute feline, amused by the lack of logic in the mysteries invented by the girl. Determined to begin, Chulan extends her hand over the board and instructs the two newcomers to place their hands in the center to start the game. The young woman blushed intensely upon noticing that the term her cousin used for newcomers in Chinese sounded very similar to newlyweds, finding it embarrassing, but she becomes even more frightened when she sees Chu Shun advance toward her with a manic, determined look, focused solely on grabbing her fingers. At the same time, Chulan helps bring their hands closer and internally complains about how her older brother is a lost cause when it comes to winning over a girl. The little girl breaks into a victorious smile, thinking to herself that this is the perfect opportunity to act as the best Cupid in the universe. Su Muqing tries to protest, blushing with embarrassment, but her cousin firmly insists that interlacing fingers around the pencil is a mandatory rule of the game. Seeing his hands approaching, the young woman feels her heart race and thinks that this sensation of physical contact is extremely strange and intense. At this point, Chu Shun's system confirms the perfect alignment of their fingers and the beginning of the synchronization of their secret mission of holding hands. As their fingers intertwine firmly around the pencil, the cousin cheers and jokingly suggests they should hold it even tighter. Su Muqing notices Chu Shun's serious and emotional expression and is confused, wondering how someone could take a children's game so seriously. The young man imagines himself climbing the steps of books towards the top of the academic world, vowing in his thoughts that he will do everything to ensure his ultimate victory. By picking up on these crazy thoughts telepathically, the girl is completely speechless when she realizes that her classmate has turned a silly game into a battle over grades. The young woman hides her blushing face as the system's timer begins to tick down the 5 minutes of mandatory physical contact required by the mission. Chu Shun's smile turned menacingly determined, and he squeezed her hand tightly, sending Su Muqing into a panic at the sudden intensity. The cousin excitedly holds the top of the pencil and announces that she will begin the game by showing the two of them how to build a true atmosphere of mystery. The atmosphere grows tense in the dark room as the girl begins to recite the official mantra to summon the spirit and obtain the answers she seeks. The two witnesses watch curiously as the little girl asks the Ouija board directly how many children she will have in her future marriage. To everyone's surprise, the pencil begins to glide slowly across the sheet of paper in a mysterious way, causing the young tutor to scream in astonishment. The object lands exactly on the number 9, leaving the cousin amazed by the result and causing Su Muqing to mentally joke about the high number. Next, the girl cheerfully asks if her future husband will be very rich, and the pencil moves without hesitation, pointing to the affirmative answer. Thrilled with her financial good fortune, the cousin decides to ask the paper tray about the physical attractiveness of the young man she is destined to marry. However, the pencil slides quickly toward the opposite side of the paper and points directly at the word no. The girl becomes utterly desperate upon realizing that her future wealthy partner will be ugly, while Su Muqing observes the scene with considerable skepticism. The young girl notices the tension and realizes immediately that the pencil is actually moving because of a real power struggle between the brothers' hands. The two stared at each other with fierce looks and dark auras of rivalry, making their colleagues silently lament that they were taking a joke so seriously. Su Muqing concludes with a mischievous smile that the answers on the board actually reveal the hidden feelings the two want to express to each other. Determined to get revenge after being sabotaged by her older brother, the cousin gives a conspiratorial look and asks if any of the three present have ever dated. The question struck the two young people like a bolt of lightning, causing Chu Shun and Su Muqing to stare at each other, their faces completely red with shock. The little girl celebrates in her thoughts, realizing she has finally managed to create a truly romantic situation for the couple in the bedroom in a fun way. However, the pencil begins to tremble and slide across the paper in a surprising way, leaving everyone at the table quite intrigued by the sudden movement. The object points directly at the word no, and the boy's cousin shouts indignantly, saying that she hadn't even tried to push the pencil. Chulan is amazed by their perfect synchronicity and celebrates in her thoughts that the couple has chemistry to spare, deciding to move on to the next question. With a mischievous smile, the little girl asks the Ouija board if her older brother is secretly in love with one of the girls at his school. The direct question leaves Chu Shun and Su Muqing completely disarmed, their faces burning with embarrassment at the girl's audacity. The cousin adopts a frighteningly focused gaze and vows to herself that she will use all her physical strength to guide the answer toward a yes. Su Muqing trembled with fear in the mysterious and awkward atmosphere, unsure what to do given the intense focus of the two brothers. Chu Shun uses all her muscular strength and recalls her days of intense training in school, refusing to lose this physical contest to her younger cousin. But the girl activates her elite athlete mode and counterattacks with the strength of her fingers, determined to beat her older brother no matter what. To the girl's delight, the pencil stops exactly on the word yes, noisily confirming that the bespectacled boy really does have a secret crush. Chu Shun rages, accusing her cousin of cheating with physical force, while the young tutor feels completely cornered by the suspicious situation. Su Muqing tries to pull his hand back and suggests ending the game, claiming it's all just psychology, but the two brothers immediately panic. With just over 2 minutes left on the system's timer, Chu Shun and Chu Lan shouted simultaneously, forbidding the girl to let go of the pencil under any circumstances. The cousin begins striking heroic poses and making dramatic speeches about destiny in an attempt to convince her guardian to keep her hand firmly in place. The bespectacled boy quickly agrees with her arguments and insists that there is no human influence on the movement of the pencil on the paper. Chu Lan celebrates their shared vision, but Su Muqing timidly complains that her colleague is squeezing her fingers too hard, prompting him to apologize. The cousin quickly regains control of the situation and asks the sheet of paper how many romantic relationships her older brother will have throughout his life. The pencil glides smoothly and stops precisely on the number 1, leaving the little girl confused by such a low score for her brother. The young man accuses his cousin of pushing the pencil again, but the girl sincerely denies it, leaving Su-mu-ching quite thoughtful in the silence. Chu-shun stops complaining when she realizes that her cousin didn't actually force the movement and begins to wonder who guided the answer to the number 1. Taking advantage of the silence, Su-mu-ching timidly raises her hand and asks if she can also ask an important question to the paperboard. The cousin grants permission with the greatest enthusiasm in the world, while the bespectacled boy simply observes her, quite curious and silent. The young woman reflects on her colleague's mysterious behavior and decides to use this opportunity to find out once and for all who he really likes. Her face flushed, she asks if the person the boy is in love with is someone known to all 3 of them present at the table. At that exact moment, Chu-shun's system timer completely resets, and the young man feels an overwhelming surge of power coursing through his entire body. The boy starts shouting victory cries and celebrating boisterously for having completed the system's friendship mission, startling the 2 girls. Before he can continue with that crazy celebration, a precise blow suddenly strikes Chu-shun's face in the middle of the dark room. The cousin kicks him and screams desperately that her older brother has been possessed by some evil and dangerous entity because of the game. Chu-lan ran to Su-mu-ching in fright, warning him that the boy's victorious smile was too frightening to belong to a normal person. She hilariously begins to imitate her brother's celebratory pose, leaving her tutor blushing with embarrassment at the whole bizarre act. Chu-shun stands up with a terrifying demonic aura and calmly asks his colleague to leave the room for a moment while he teaches his cousin a lesson. Chu-lan desperately clings to Su-mu-ching's hand and begs, screaming, for her future sister-in-law to save her from the fury, leaving her tutor completely paralyzed. An awkward and complete silence falls over the study after the mention of that compromising word in front of everyone. The little girl realizes the seriousness of her mistake and gives a sheepish little smile, trying to pretend that she was just innocently confused when she spoke. The young man runs furiously after his cousin, demanding severe punishment, while Su-mu-ching tries to hide her embarrassment, and the pencil points to the yes on the table. Later, the 2 walk back home together under the beautiful starry night, calmly discussing the outcome of today's private lesson. The young woman gripped her backpack tightly and asked her colleague if his family always gave such generous banquets for the hired tutors. The young man directly denies it and timidly confesses that he almost never brings friends to his home and that she was only the 2nd person to visit him. Su-mu-ching's heart races and he blushes deeply as he shyly wonders if she's the 2nd girl he's ever taken home. But Chu-shun quickly clarifies that she counts both boys and girls on that list and calmly repeats that she holds the 2nd position overall in terms of visits. He reveals that the 1st person was his friend Fang Yuan, making the young tutor sigh with jealousy over the strong friendship the 2 boys share. The girl sweetly confesses that it was the first time she had dined at a male colleague's house and that she had never been received with such affection. Chu-shun lowers his head in embarrassment, asking if the affection was excessive, and Su-mu-ching stammers, blushing with shame, assuring him that she loved everything. She walks thoughtfully under the streetlights, trying to understand at what exact moment that competitive relationship began to change course. The young woman fondly recalls the times when she used to leave her classmate behind on the grade list, never imagining that one day he would be so close to her life. She realizes that their current relationship goes far beyond ranking disputes and the academic pride of whoever comes in first place. Su-mu-ching smiled, noticing that their paths had begun to intertwine deeply and that the former Chu-shun would never have looked at her with such seriousness. She fondly remembers when she got hungry after skipping lunch, and her colleague coincidentally brought her an extra delicious packed lunch. She also remembers when she was desperate with debt, and the guy suddenly appeared out of nowhere with the perfect offer for a well-paid tutoring job. For the girl, her classmate became a light that emerged in her difficult world, guiding her steps gently and leaving no room for any shadow of sadness. Su-mu-ching notices that her colleague has been constantly staring at her for the past few days and admits to herself that she can't take her eyes off him either. As they walk side by side, the young woman notices how close their hands are and wonders how she should define what the young man means to her. She senses that he is no longer just a rival for grades, much less a simple benefactor, and rushes forward slightly to try to calm her thoughts. The girl stops in the middle of the sidewalk, turns slowly under the beautiful starry sky, and calls out to her classmate with an unusual sweetness. With a flushed face and an adorable look, Su Muqing gathers her courage and asks directly if this means the two are finally friends now. The question echoes softly in the silence of the night, leaving the girl with her arms crossed, anxiously awaiting the answer from the bespectacled boy. Chushun stops walking, completely paralyzed, and mentally confesses that the doubt caught him totally by surprise and left him speechless. The young man reflects on all his recent actions and concludes that his behavior wasn't motivated by friendship, since she remains his greatest rival. Noticing her colleague's cold and analytical expression, Su Muqing bites her lip, annoyed to realize that to him, she remains just a study rival. Without saying anything more, the girl turns her back and quickens her pace, leaving Chushun pondering how his life has changed since the system paired him with her. The boy looks at the sky and reflects on how he imagined that summer would be just another tiring period focused on solving endless lists of exercises. He compares the sudden change in his routine to accidentally falling into a can of sweet and extremely refreshing peach soda. In his imagination, he floats surrounded by bubbles filled with sweet memories of Su Muqing, feeling a gentle sweetness that makes him want to relive every moment with her. The boy realizes that suddenly the summer in that small town has taken on a completely new and much warmer flavor because of his classmates' presence. With a determined smile, he hurries to catch up with the girl and assures himself that this beautiful warm season is only just beginning. The two finally stop in front of her residence gate, and Su Muqing shyly tells him that he can stop there now, as he's very close to her door. She turns around with the most beautiful and radiant smile of gratitude, leaving her bespectacled colleague completely speechless with such sweetness. Chushun merely murmurs a cold agreement, causing the girl's expression to change instantly, and she walks away, upset by his lack of feeling. The girl grumbles irritably to herself, thinking that they are definitely not friends, and vows that she will no longer try to be nice to someone so insensitive. But before she can cross the entrance gate, the boy calls her loudly in an extremely focused and serious manner, making her look back. The young man with glasses points to his chest and firmly warns her never again to use such a shallow word as friends to define their relationship. Su Muqing goes into complete shock and turns as red as a pepper, her eyes rolling as she imagines if he is about to declare his love. Completely terrified by her own shyness, she shouts that she understood the message and runs inside, slamming the door shut to escape him. Outside, Chushun adjusts his glasses and grumbles that his colleague doesn't understand anything, since in his mind, the title of arch-enemies is far superior to that of friends. Inside, the girl leans against the door, her heart racing with embarrassment, convinced that her classmate meant to suggest that they are much more than friends. She tries to calm herself and remembers when the spirit summoning game was interrupted in her cousin's room because of the boy's strange behavior. Su Muqing vividly recalls the moment when the pencil mysteriously pointed to the confirmation that Chushun does indeed have a secret crush. The young woman bites her fingers, her cheeks flushed, wondering curiously if her bespectacled classmate truly harbors romantic feelings for someone. In his study, Chushun holds a blank sheet of writing paper and decides that this is the perfect time to test his newfound system skill. The young man is filled with mystical energy and shouts for the system to immediately activate the literary talent card he just unlocked in the mission. The floating screen confirms the command and details that the new ability will make his thoughts flow infinitely more brilliantly in texts. Chushun celebrates with loud laughter as he feels the boost of inspiration and writing coursing through his veins, ready to revolutionize his performance in school essays. He imagines himself as an ancient master of literature, painting a work of art with a brush, marveling at receiving a bonus far superior to that of absolute focus. The boy feels that brilliant ideas and poetic structures organize themselves in his mind, considering the power of that ability simply broken by how good it is. With his eyes shining like stars, he plans to spend the entire night creating perfect essay templates to memorize in the following days. However, his cell phone starts ringing loudly on the table, abruptly interrupting his entire literary concentration. Chushun answers the phone call with a confused expression, not understanding who would be calling him at that late hour of the night. It's his cousin lying in bed, calling to demand compliments for her excellent performance as Cupid during the young tutor's visit. The boy ironically suggests explaining a complex math problem to help her fall asleep faster, greatly irritating the girl on the other end of the line. The cousin ignores the provocation and complains, annoyed that he ended dinner so early, revealing that she still had several intimate questions to ask the couple. Chu-shun logically replies that he has already figured out the whole pencil trick and warns that whoever applies the most pressure with their fingers will determine the final answer. He starts giving a financial lecture about the cost of raising 9 children these days, causing the little girl to scream desperately on the phone for him to stop. The young man imagines himself as a judge in a suit and red tie, dramatically declaring that his cousin will be held accountable for slander after spreading rumors. Chulan points her finger angrily and accuses her own older brother of secretly pushing the pencil to manipulate all the results. Back to reality, Chu-shun coldly replies that he's not that unoccupied and prepares to hang up the phone in her face. But immediately after hanging up, the boy stares silently at the desk in the middle of the dark room. He remembers Su Mu-ching's embarrassed reactions during the prank and wonders why she agreed to participate in such madness with them. The young man focuses his mind on the last question of the game, remembering the exact moment when the pencil pointed to yes regarding his supposed love interest. The bespectacled boy blushed slightly as he realized a frightening and very important detail that had gone unnoticed in his calculations. Meanwhile, the cousin stares at the phone in disbelief that he hung up, but freezes when she notices his message, revealing that he wasn't the one who pushed the pencil. The boy's cousin recalls being eager to know if his secret crush was known to everyone, but she didn't expect her brother to suddenly burst into joy. Alone in her room, Chulan examines the paper game board and begins to wonder who could be pushing the pencil if it wasn't her, and certainly not her brother. A chilling and unsettling suspicion runs through the girl's mind as she stares at the motionless object on the silent table. She panics completely when she realizes with horror that the spirit summoned by the board game never actually left the place. Suddenly, a terrifying noise coming from her closet confirms her worst fears by revealing 2 bright red eyes in the darkness. Screaming at the top of her lungs, the little girl runs desperately out of the room, reciting mystical prayers of protection to try and ward off the supposed entity. She knocks on her parents' door begging to sleep with them, but Chu-shun's uncles appear angrily, ordering the girl to immediately return to her bed. The following morning, the bespectacled boy walks through the silent school hallways, pleased to have earned extra experience points from the mission. He drinks his canned coffee, planning to upgrade his absolute focus skill to the blue level before the noise of classes begins, but something interrupts him. The boy stops abruptly in the middle of the stairs, and his eyes widen as he comes across a totally bizarre and unexpected scene in the school hallway. Before him, a mysterious figure with long black hair stands on a chair, looking like a real monster straight out of a horror movie. He watches the shadowy creature's back in the hallway and wonders what such a ghost would be doing there so early in the day at the elite school. Determined to maintain scientific rationality, Chu-shun adjusts his glasses and moves forward fearlessly, repeating to himself the country's social order slogans. The bespectacled boy begins to meticulously analyze the muscle contractions in the girl's legs to understand the physical stability of her pose in the chair. He continues his scientific analysis, focusing on the tension in her white stockings, while the long-haired girl remains completely oblivious to his presence. Noticing that she is merely putting up a poster on the bulletin board, the young man concludes with relief that it is not a ghost and decides to walk past silently. However, when she throws her empty can into the trash can, the metallic noise startles the girl, causing her to completely lose her balance and fall from her chair. The boy hears the thud of the fall and glances sideways to check what happened to his colleague in the silent hallway. The young woman lying on the ground complains of pain and grumbles that her bottom is about to split in two under Chu-shun's analytical and judgmental gaze. The boy observes her in that awkward pose and comically thinks that she looks a lot like the classic ghost from the well in horror movies. He approaches and explains scientifically that she didn't fall on that area of her body and that, biologically speaking, that structure is already divided into 2 parts. The girl pushes her hair aside, revealing beautiful purple eyes, and complains indignantly, questioning if this is the ideal moment to give an anatomy lesson. Chu-shun tries to justify his physics arguments so as not to be accused of anything, and the young woman angrily fumes, commenting that he really studied until he became stupid. She demands a more chivalrous demeanor from her because she's a girl, but the bespectacled boy stares at her, confused, and asks directly if he happens to know her. The young woman clutches her pigtails indignantly and reveals that she was transferred to the same class as him 6 months ago, questioning how he doesn't remember her. Without the slightest sensitivity, the boy adjusts his glasses and coldly confesses that he doesn't usually remember the names of people who have lower grades than him. The girl blushes and grumbles that she should have expected that coldness, commenting ironically that he probably only remembers her rival, Su Muqing. She extends her hand, showing her scraped knee from the fall, and asks her classmate to help her get up before they continue talking. The young man hesitates suspiciously, asking if she won't blame him for the fall, and the young woman shouts angrily, assuring him that she won't make any accusations against him. The girl begins to fix her messy hair and shyly explains that she didn't expect to find anyone at school so early in the morning. She carefully tucks the long strands of hair behind her ear while continuing to talk with her back to the bespectacled young man. She turns around, showing off 2 pretty pigtails, and flashes a sweet smile, asking if he can finally remember who she is now. Chu Shun mentally calls her by the nickname of the horror ghost, making the girl yell angrily that her real name is Shu Zhenjian. The bespectacled boy bluntly states that he doesn't usually remember the face of a classmate who ranked 179th in school. The young woman stares at him, her eyes wide with indignation, as she realizes that he actually classifies and evaluates people based on their school report cards. She clenches her fists and angrily begs to give her colleague a single punch to vent her anger, while the boy justifies that he didn't do it out of malice. The young man reflects mentally that he prefers to avoid unnecessary social contact with classmates so as not to waste his valuable study time. He blames the school's rigid grading system for creating a real barrier and an invisible division of classes among the students. But the boy remembers that Shu Zhenjian is the only one in Class A who has been in the lower rankings for 3 consecutive months, which is why he remembers her. In his mental danger assessment, he classifies the girl as having a 0 threat level and no real possibility of interfering with his daily routine. Seeing her fist raised, he sighs and asks point-blank how much money she wants as a bribe to forget the story and not charge him. Shu Zhenjian gives his colleague a friendly pat on the shoulder and comments with a smile that he's much more fun and playful than people usually gossip about in the room. The bespectacled boy gestures nervously, assuring her that he wasn't joking, and begs her not to demand any financial compensation for the fall. The girl winks sweetly and reveals that it was just a joke, promising that she won't hurt him or ask him for any money. She bends down to rummage in her school bag and gives him a mischievous look, warning him that she'll forgive him if he agrees to do her a small favor. The young woman is holding up a colorful poster for a 3-line poetry contest and asking for help hanging it high up on the bulletin board, a spot she can't reach. Chu Shun questions why the poster needs to be so high up, and Shu Zhenjian cheerfully explains that images positioned at the top attract much more attention. The boy accepts the favor and climbs onto the wooden chair, but decides to ask his classmate with pigtails a curious question before hanging up. He wants to know the meaning of that poetic event, and the young woman explains that it's a joint activity between the literature club and the school's radio club. She proudly reveals that she is the vice president of the literature club and jokingly suggests that he should beg if he wants to secure a prominent spot at the event. The young man immediately rejects the invitation and decides to put on his headphones to ignore her, focusing his attention on an advanced university lecture. Shu Zhenjian gestures indignantly, trying to convince him that the contest prizes are excellent, but her colleague remains completely oblivious to her pleas. Chu Shun removes his headphones for a moment and asks suspiciously why she is so desperate to get him to participate in that event. The girl clasps her hands together dramatically, pleading for help, her bright eyes promising eternal gratitude for the rest of her life. The boy stares intently at her and demands a logical explanation for her insistence on getting his signature on the poetry contest. The young woman with pigtails blushes and shyly confesses that the literature club finally organized a joint event, but almost no one signed up. She tugs at his jacket, complaining that the club president demanded each vice president obtain 10 poems, which is why she's secretly putting up posters. Chu Shun is horrified to discover that she posted the advertisements without any authorization from the school, but the girl thinks her tactic was brilliant. The boy realizes with despair that he has become an accomplice to that school infraction and tries to leave, but the young woman promises to write a poem for him to simply sign. He questions why she doesn't sign the texts herself, and the girl cries, explaining that the event needs to be a resounding success to make the president proud. Chu Shun ironically asks if the feared club president usually applies physical punishments or severe suspensions to disobedient members. With flushed cheeks, the girl clasps her hands together and sweetly confesses that the club leaders simply start crying loudly if the event fails. The bespectacled boy is completely speechless at that dramatic childishness, not noticing that his colleague Fang Yuan is spying on the two of them from afar. Fang Yuan watches the conversation from afar and feels deeply betrayed seeing his best friend talking so intimately with another girl from school. Finally alone in the classroom, Chu-shun celebrates the peace he has achieved and mentally commands the system to begin the skill upgrade process. The system's floating screen asks if he wants to spend his experience points to upgrade absolute focus, and the boy confirms the command immediately. A brightly colored light shines intensely in the empty classroom, confirming that the absolute focus skill has been successfully upgraded to the blue rarity. Surrounded by complex mathematical formulas, Chu-shun breaks into a radiant smile as he experiences an incredible sense of mental clarity and inner peace. He imagines himself holding a pen with utter elegance, feeling that all the problems and answers in the universe connect perfectly in his mind. The young man envisions himself as a maestro, conducting a brilliant concerto of studies, experiencing the purest and most intense pleasure in solving each problem. In his comical and exaggerated imagination, he feels overwhelmed by the very mathematical tests he encounters, celebrating the overwhelming power the system grants him. Chu-shun analyzes the updated details and celebrates with a laugh, noting that his learning efficiency has doubled with the new level he has achieved. Even during regular class, he laments that the next upgrade requires many points, and that gaining so much experience will be quite a difficult task. The bespectacled boy dramatically laments being isolated at the top of the world of geniuses, with no one around to admire his true brilliance. He concludes that only his great rival Su Muqing could understand his mind, but the girl hides behind her books, blushing furiously. Chu-shun watches in confusion as his classmate rushes out of the classroom, her hands covering her red face, unable to understand the sudden reaction. The young man wonders if he did something wrong to make her angry the previous day, and finds it quite strange that she is avoiding eye contact with him today. He racks his brain and deduces that the embarrassment must have been caused by the intimate and tricky questions his cousin asked during the pencil game. The young man despairs at the thought that she might think he planned all of that on purpose, believing she interpreted the joke as a declaration of love. Fang Yuan approaches his friend's table and curiously asks what he was discussing so mysteriously with Shu Zhenzhen earlier that morning. Chu-shun's expression becomes eerily grim, and he accuses him of harassment, but his friend defends himself, claiming he was merely doing his cleaning duty. The chubby boy starts gossiping about his classmates' family connections, while a familiar shadow approaches from behind in the middle of the classroom hallway. Shu Zhenzhen suddenly appeared, slamming her hand on their table and asking directly if the bespectacled boy had finished the task she had asked him to do. The young man asks what the subject might be, and the girl demands the 3-line poem, leaving Fang Yuan mortified by the girl's sudden arrival. Chu-shun complains about his pigtail-wearing colleague's bossy tone, but she flashes a mischievous smile, assuring him that he made a commitment when he took the sign. With a malicious look, the boy puts his arm around Fang Yuan's shoulder and threatens to unleash his talkative friend to bother her if she continues to demand that favor from him. Shu Zhenzhen gestures frantically, begging him not to resort to such extreme measures, leaving the chubby boy completely bewildered. Fang Yuan is deeply offended by the two's whispers, indignantly complaining about being treated like some kind of cursed creature by the pair. The girl rests her face on the table and begins to flatter her bespectacled classmate with saccharine compliments, begging for help from the best and kindest student in the class. Chu-shun stares intently at his colleague and demands that she repeat exactly the complimentary phrase she just uttered about his intelligence. The two begin discussing the previous sentences in thought bubbles, with the boy insistently searching for the biggest and best compliment she could have given him. Hearing the girl repeat that he is the best student in the class, the boy enters a true state of ecstasy and pleasure as his ego is inflated. The young woman continues to list exaggerated compliments about his bright academic future, while Fang Yuan covers her ears, complaining that the flattery has gone too far. Feeling like the true king of literature, Chu-shun arrogantly orders her to hand over a pen, and Shu Zhenzhen submissively obeys like a servant. The boy holds the pen with complete confidence, but ends up ruining the mood by asking, in a confused manner, what the correct format of a 3-line poem is. The girl lets out a desperate scream in the classroom when she realizes that the supposed literary genius doesn't even know the most basic rules of the contest. Outside, Su Muqing rests her hands on her face, completely red with embarrassment, unable to stop thinking about the events of the previous night. She recalls his intense statement telling her not to use the word friends to define them, indignant that he's acting so normally today after saying something so strong. The young woman bites her lip, fuming with anger, feeling wronged for being the only one still suffering from shame over the memories of that night's conversation. She peers down the hallway, trying to muster up courage, remembering that she needs to talk to him no matter what and promising herself she can stay calm and act normally. Chushun continues to observe Shu Zhenzhen in silence, trying to understand the temperament of that dramatic and demanding girl. Suddenly, the classroom door opens, and Sumu Qing timidly enters, calling for her classmate, startling and drawing the attention of everyone at the table. The young woman nods in a friendly manner, asking about the subject of the conversation, causing the vice president of the literature club to widen her eyes in complete shock. Shu Zhenzhen panics when she remembers her colleague's reputation as an untouchable ice queen, not understanding why she's taking the initiative to start a conversation. As tension builds in the room, Cousin Chulan recalls when she heroically swore that she would make any sacrifice without hesitation for her cousin.